This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental. This story is purely fictional and does not promote or encourage any form of violence. If the noise before had been excited, this was even more so. A few people begged for a promotion on the spot. A few were steaming mad that they didn't get to participate right away. But most were just happy for the guild. All current guild officers, I'm going to need you to join me near the castle gates in about 2 hours. Everyone else, I hope you are as happy about this as I am, and I also hope that if you are disappointed, you work to prove yourself capable of being a guild officer. As our roster fills out, we will need more and more officers to lead parties of new recruits. Good luck, everyone, and great work so far. With the end of the morning announcement, most people returned to whatever they were doing beforehand. Joe wavered between excitement and exasperation toward the news. He really wanted to go set up rituals and practice with them, honing and refining his craft. He wanted to go and study magic until he was an undisputed master. Joe's eye twitched, and he sighed as he thought through his options. Study and empowerment versus meeting royalty. Maybe he could. He gave up. The guild needed not only him, but all members to continue getting quests and completing them for the guild. Only 2 dramatic and defeated sighs later, Joe decided to compromise by going to collect all the materials he needed for his new rituals and set them up later. That way, he could get the best of both worlds, if not in the order he wanted them. He had to be fast. Joe hurried out of the guild, excited to advance his craft. The sudden onset of ambition was new, but he simply thought of it as overexcitement. Going about his day would surely calm him down. After wasting time walking through the merchant district, Joe had to stop and ask directions. As it happened, there wasn't a standard musical instrument store, but instead, a bardic college. Unlike the mages' college, this place was open for anyone. He entered the strangely built building, learning instantly that the shape of the walls was designed to create a barrier of soundproofing. Joe winced at some of the sounds he heard coming from small rooms as he passed them. He wondered idly if the ear-rending sounds were meant as some kind of sonic defense. For the college, it was obvious that this area must be where novices learned how to play their chosen instrument. After asking directions a few times, he left behind the practice rooms and came upon an administrative area with a secretary sitting behind a desk. "Can I help you, mister?" She politely smiled at him, though boredom was evident in her eyes. "Joe." Joe smiled in return. "I was hoping to purchase some tuning forks." "Sure thing, honey. How many and in what note?" The lady had pulled out a clipboard and was preparing to write on it. "Oh, let's see here. But, Joe pretended to think about what he needed, foisting off the question on her. "What do you have here that is abundant and of at least uncommon quality?" "I was hoping to give them out as gifts to some musician friends, but I'm not sure what they need." Musicians? An unexpected sneer crossed her face. No wonder they don't already have the equipment they need to succeed. No self-respecting bard would allow someone else to choose their equipment for them. Joe was taken aback at her abrupt shift in attitude and hastily made his purchases before scurrying out the door. Thinking over the situation, he shrugged. Was there a way for him to have handled that better? In his mind, bards were the most ridiculed class, but that might only be true in other games he had played. Maybe they had a different role here. Why were simple musicians so disparaged? Joe decided to ignore this interaction. He had far more important things to worry about for now. Looking over his purchases, He counted out 30 tuning forks. That should be enough for quite a while, and hopefully someone else would be at the counter the next time he had to stock up. Next on the list was various components, so he bravely walked to the alchemist and had an awkward conversation with the strangely flamboyant potion maker. After he made his purchases and left that store. He stopped by the general goods store and bought as many remaining ritual components as possible. He wanted to be ready to create rituals constantly. He had no interest in running to the store every 5 minutes. Joe made it to the meeting point 20 minutes early and used the time to start sketching out some simple rituals on his spare paper. The difference in his hands' fluidity of motion between yesterday and this morning was intriguing. He didn't feel like he was doing anything different, but his hands were steady and the symbols were drawn out with a grace that he had despaired of ever attaining. Yea, dexterity. He continued working for as long as possible, but time was running out. Just as most of the people showed up for the meeting, Joe got a very welcome, yet strangely rude notification. Skill gained, drawing, Novice 1. It looks like you have graduated from extra-large crayons. It is very surprising to see someone start this skill at Novice 1. Typically, artists show some skill when starting to draw, and their talent is adjusted accordingly. Once again, you prove how extra special you are. Keep up this pace, and you may even become a beginner by the time you retire. Effect: plus 1% easier to create accurate artwork per level. What was going on with his notifications recently? They seem to have become far more snarky, sarcastic even. Joe tried to think about when this started, and as far as he could tell, it began when he killed the Wolfman during the ritual yesterday. Did he accidentally set his notifications to rude? He started to pull open his status sheet, but A10 chose that moment to begin talking. Thank you all for joining us this morning. First, let's go over some ground rules. This statement was met with loud groans and booing. Yeah. Listen, I'm pretty sure you are all adults, so I'll keep it simple. Don't screw up. If you do something stupid in there, you're either going to be sent to respawn or to jail. I haven't met a single person associated with the castle that has a sense of humor, so keep the jokes on silent mode. We are apparently getting a major quest line, so pay attention to the details. Remember that the wording of quests can change the entire meaning based off interpretation, so we will talk about this in a meeting later. Everyone ready? The gates were swinging open behind him, and it almost looked like he had planned his speech to coincide with it, for dramatic effect. This effect was ruined somewhat as a yelp escaped his lips. A royal guard had appeared beside him and was inspecting him from about an inch away. The guard nodded after an awkward moment and looked around at the other people gathered. His eyes lingered on each person, and twice he pointed at a player. Those two. What about them, sir? A10 politely inquired while opening his guild tab to view their information. They are traitors to either your guild or humanity as a whole. This person is a traitor to your guild, while the other has the title Race Traitor. Their statuses are falsified by a mid-tier effect, so they have outside help. He has a different guild, Black Brotherhood, listed as his actual guild. As for her, it appears she is trying to join the Wolfman faction by attacking and killing humans. The guard rattled all of this off with a deadpan vocalization. His words shocked the others, and everyone present stared at the two who were called out. They pretended innocence and confusion for a few long moments, but one of them broke and started running. Seeing this, the other paled and ran away as well. Making a strange motion with his hands, the guard flicked something at the race traitor. She yelped and was suddenly surrounded in the red glow of a murderer. In the middle of the city, it was unlikely she would survive long, so no one bothered to give chase. The royal guard's eyes kept roaming among the people until Joe felt the shining eyes trying to pry secrets from his status. Greater Inspect resisted. Tatum is pleased with you for the boost in power he has recently gained, and has used a drop of this power to grant you a 6-hour divine effect, Veiled Soul. This will rebuff all attempts to read your true status screen. When the benefit from this expires, you may regain the buff by making a donation or praying at an altar. Message from Tatum. Woo. Close one there. Thanks for the new altar. The royal guard seemed puzzled, blinking at Joe a few times before moving on. He turned to 18. The rest are who they say they are. At least their loyalty to your guild and the kingdom are not in question. Welcome to the Grand Palace, Ardenia. The royal couple is awaiting you. Chapter 30. Joe had a strange cognitive dissonance as they walked into the palace. The palace and grounds were beautiful, just not in the way he had expected. The castle itself was obviously ancient, but had never been repaired. Or if it had been repaired, it was done so perfectly that the walls were utterly flawless. There were flowers and various beautification projects throughout the grounds, but it was obvious that their budget was nowhere near the one for war. The true beauty of the area came from the training grounds, which completely surrounded the palace. Royal Guardsmen hopefuls moved in shining armor. Scouts were firing volleys of arrows at stationary targets, and messengers were running back and forth between the various camps. This was the training ground of the elite. An elbow to the side caused Joe to drop his intent gaze from all the combatants. Tiona was now walking beside him, looking him up and down before whistling. I like the new look. Skeleton just didn't suit you. Just wait until I'm able to get my strength to 10 as well, Joe exclaimed excitedly. I'll start looking like my actual self again. Oh, you weren't this slim before? Tiona inspected his body dispassionately. You don't look bad this way. Thanks, but I am looking forward to having a bit more muscle. I feel like if I grew my hair out a bit and went to a bar right now, I'd start getting free drinks from the men. Joe chuckled at Tiona's eye roll. You'd need a heck of a lot more charisma if you wanted to pull that off. Your face looks a bit like a squashed potato. Also, grow your hair out? Really, Baldy? You'd need hair in the first place in order to grow it out. Tiona snickered as Joe pretended to be hurt. So rude. Confidence destroyed. Can't pay guild dues. Joe snorted at Tiona's fake look of horror and turned to look at the large set of doors they were approaching. I bet those open into the Great Hall. That's where royalty of old would accept petitioners and hold court. This should be interesting. The chatter died down as the group stepped into the palace proper. A feeling of reverence, fear, and power flowed over them. It felt a bit like being in a library as a sniper watched you through a scope, tracking your every move and waiting to pull the trigger. They were approaching the thrones, but it seemed there were overly large metal statues occupying them. The group looked around, waiting for the royals to arrive, but the guard who had escorted them was wide-eyed at their insolence. "Bow, you fools," he hissed as he bowed toward the thrones. "It is unnecessary. Many who come here unprepared do not know or understand our position." A distinctly feminine voice came from the metal statue on the right. Joe wasn't the only person to flinch when what appeared to be a statue turned her head to look at them. "Welcome, travelers. As a part of the noble guild, the Wanderers, you have earned an audience this day. Before we give you the details of your quest, please know that you may not tell another person the reason for it. You may share details such as where you need to go or what you need to fight, but you cannot tell them why beyond that. It is a quest. If you stay here for the explanation, I will take acquiescence as your answer and bind you to it." The guild members looked at each other, most shrugging or rolling their eyes. Requirements like this seem to be in all of the quests given by higher-ranking individuals. It was frustrating, as trying to help someone else through a similar quest proved impossible. When no one laughed or had anything to say, the Queen began again. "It is good to have such stalwart heroes." The Queen exhaled a metallic blast of air, a sigh, some background for all of you. A long time ago, our entire world had devolved to a state of war. Every race fought each other for the control of places of power. The battles escalated to a point where mutually assured destruction was imminent, and the inhabitants of the world were waiting to die. An outside force took control, and each nation was placed under a spell. Our populations collected together. We were frozen in a sleep-like state. We did not dream. We did not note the passage of time. We slept long enough that the outside influence was able to take control of all of our lives, and he separated us by changing the very world we stood upon. Then he raised us, this entire area, off of the continent far below. Joe's mind turned to when he had been forced to jump into the hole in the world, and how different that experience had been. He shuddered as he remembered the power of the monsters there. It may have been for the best that they were separate. Because of our foolishness and our bloodthirst, when we were awoken several hundred years ago, we were given a task to complete. On this raised continent, there is only one other sentient race of people. Each of the races gets a single chance to prove that they should be the ones to survive. And the way we show this is by defeating the other group. Her voice was grave and dark, as she seemed to relive their history. If we win this horrible game, our continent will connect to another, where two other races are also battling for their right to live. We will be able to choose one of them to help. It will continue like this until we have saved all the races that we can, forging alliances and generating goodwill. For now, though, we must ask you to do an awful, terrible thing. You must help us win this game. So, your quest is to break the Wolfman Nation, slaughter their people, and capture their leader's throne. Silence thundered through the area. Aten, oddly, was the first to break the silence. Awesome. As if his words were a trigger, a notification appeared in front of all of them. Quest alert. Shatter a people. The Queen of Ardenia has offered your guild a quest. All you need to do is gain entrance to the most highly guarded area in Wolfman territory. Kill their leaders, fighters, non-combatants, and capture the throne. Completing this quest will break the Wolfman Nation, leading to their eventual eradication or subservience to humans. Reward: experience 50,000, 100,000 gold to the guild treasury, and up to 10,000 gold for each participant in the final battle, based on contribution. Maximum reputation with the city of Ardenia. Failure: the human nation is shattered, leading to the eventual eradication or subservience of all humans to wolfmen. Frick on a stick. This is an endgame level quest, y'all. Aten's face was practically glowing as he read over the quest notification. Then we get to connect to other races. Can you imagine the secret classes and stuff we will find in an area humans haven't touched in hundreds of years? He wiped a drop of drool from his mouth as he said this. So we are going to have to topple a nation? One of the officers questioned. No, we are going to topple a race, someone else called. Or shatter a race. Aten looked toward the Queen once again. What is the timeline for this quest? How long do we have? As long as you need. Her next words made a few people go quiet. All 4 noble guilds will have this quest. And as long as it is completed before they are able to destroy us, you can take all the time you need. Our battles have been raging for hundreds of years. What is a few more? There is something important to take note of, though. Last night it seems that one of their summoning spells backfired. Our scouts are reporting heavy casualties amongst their civilian population, and light casualties amongst their fighters. We don't know what happened, but somehow a blow was struck against them that they weren't expecting. Tyona looked at Joe sharply, but he pretended not to notice. After all, there was no way he was going to be able to repeat that ritual without losing a part of his humanity. He had originally wanted to change it to be less human sacrificey, but after recreating the ritual diagram on paper, he had found that it was a master-tier ritual called Abyss on Earth that required 5 mages to initiate. Altering the required components was impossible with his current abilities. All he had done yesterday was give it a different target and refresh the lines the mana ran along. The massive cost also explained why the shaman had been so easy to defeat. They had been running on fumes and what their mana regeneration would allow. Not only could he not change it, but he didn't actually know all the required components and items needed to actually empower the ritual. He wouldn't be performing a ritual on that scale for quite a long time. As guild leader of the Wanderers, I officially accept this quest, Your Majesty, Aten announced with a deep bow. The Queen nodded. She had expected no other outcome from the meeting today. Just know that your silence on this matter will be magically enforced. We don't need riots about the end of the world, and we certainly don't need people running off and becoming race traitors because they pity the wolves. I thank you all in advance and wish you the best of luck. I have given authorization for Aten to have information on a series of classes and specializations that we know of. Feel free to use them. Go now and become strong. Their audience over, the guild officers left the building, chattering excitedly. Not only had they gained an amazing quest, they now had access to more classes and specializations. This would be a huge benefit to their recruitment efforts and help secure their position as a powerful and prolific guild. Several people started talking with Aten as soon as they were out of the gates, and he quickly acquired a harried look as he worked to access and disseminate the information given to him. Joe grinned and started walking toward the guild. Tyona caught up to him quickly, since her walking speed was easily double his. Not sticking around to learn about a new class. Nah, I'm pretty happy with mine. Joe flashed a smile at her, but his mind was on other things. He really needed to get a workspace for himself. It turned out that only novice rituals were able to be performed with simple infusions of mana into their symbols. Starting at the beginner ranks, rituals needed chants, specialized equipment or tools, and more than anything, large amounts of protected space. Not just so that the ritual was large enough to easily find errors, but also because if a ritual failed, there tended to be devastating effects. He had read a note in his book, where a miner had cut through a ritual's symbolic links as it was powering up, and the release of power had obliterated a city. Joe, Tyona tapped him on the arm. Are you mad at me? You don't need to say anything if you don't want to. I just want you to know that it isn't because of you. What? Joe's eyes locked onto her, and he realized that he had missed something important while lost in his thoughts. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I was off in my own little world. Wow, we are literally living in a fantasy world, and you still want to abstract it one step further. She smiled, but the expression was strained. I said that I am disbanding the party. I'm getting close to level 10, and I really need to take as much time as possible to grind my skills before I specialize. Thanks to the new classes and specializations we have access to, I was able to find a really awesome class I want to specialize in. I need to become an apprentice to one of the Royal Guard trainers to get it, though. If I get accepted, I won't be back for at least a month." "What?" This time, Joe's half-formed word was due to incredulousness, not lack of attention. "Have you told the others?" She shook her head. "No, that's what I'm off to do now. I really wanted to thank you, though. Without all of you guys fighting with me, I wouldn't have made enough gold to take the time away from quests to train." He wanted to say something, but what could he? She had been the first real person to help him in the game, and now that she was leaving, he felt a bit sour inside. Not angry, just a mix of sadness and overprotective friendship. "If that's what you want to do, I'm glad you are going to do it," Joe stated firmly while shaking her hand. She thanked him, and they returned to the guild in silence. Dylan didn't take the news quite as stoically. "What the heck, Tiona? We were just starting to get a good battle rhythm. We were finally working together like a team, getting stronger and making serious money. You are just going to toss that aside? If we beat this quest, we can earn up to 10,000 gold each." Tiona spoke carefully, doing her best to explain her thoughts. "I want us to be a team in the future, but I need to get to level 10 and get my new class while I still can." Dylan looked away, crossed his arms, and said nothing else. Guess and Chad both shrugged and didn't say anything beyond, "Good luck." Tiona nodded at them all and walked away, returning to the castle. Joe looked around at the morose faces and tried to decide what to do next. "I mean, we could all party together still. Let's just find a fifth and—" Chad interrupted him. "Can't do it. To get contribution points for the guild, we're going to need a party leader who is a higher level than us. Also, I hate to say it, but it isn't likely another party leader will want you on their team. As great as it is to have a healer, Tiona had to split her officer's commission to account for your salary. No one else is going to want to work for free or half price." Joe wanted to argue, but stopped himself. As much as he wanted to continue adventuring with these three, not having a party might be exactly what he needed to gain the time to study, practice, and perfect his class. He had been running himself ragged since he joined the game, so that he could keep up with the higher-level players on his team. Maybe it really was time for him to go solo for a while. It looked like they had a few in-game months before they could really make progress on the royal quest anyway. They finished their meeting and slowly dispersed, saying their goodbyes morosely. The three others went to find a new party, while Joe went into town to find a place to make into his workshop. Chapter 31. In preparation for lengthy research and development of his skills, Joe had told Aiton that he was taking a few weeks to train. The guild leader had actually looked relieved that Joe wasn't demanding to take over as party leader for his group and wasn't fighting to keep them together. Apparently, under Tiona's leadership, the members of the party had become well respected, and several guild officers were already vying for them to join their party. Basically, he had saved Aten the trouble of telling him no. Joe rolled his eyes as he forced himself back to the present. He had rented a building and needed to get to work. It wasn't perfect, but for now, it was his. Joe looked around the dusty warehouse, already planning out what he would need to do to protect the place. The owner of Odds and Ends had offered him a lease on the large building when he had mentioned he was looking for a large, open space. He was lucky to get such a good deal, even if the structure was in a seedy part of the city. Apparently, she used the building to store goods that weren't ready for her store yet. Now that she was planning on leaving the business, the warehouse was simply sitting empty and unused. The building supposedly had a few basic protection enchantments, but he had been warned that anyone could smash through them if they really tried. He was going to need to fix that issue. His first task was not to put powerful magical protections on the building. No, that would simply bring attention to him. People would wonder what treasures he was hiding, and their insatiable curiosity and greed would make them brave any barriers in their way. No, making this place undesirable was the way to go. If being near this place was annoying and frustrating, perhaps embarrassing, people would avoid it at any cost. Pulling out his book of dark rituals, Joe began to write down the various effects and area of effect he was after. As it happened, he found that he had been making an incorrect assumption about the magic he was using. Since most of the runes and diagrams were circular, he had thought that they would all have a circular area of effect. In fact, he could change the affected area simply by changing a few variables in the circle itself. His eyebrow twitched in anger when he found that he didn't need to make a gigantic ritual circle around the guild house to stave off monsters. He only needed to adjust the parameters so that the effect was pushed out to the range he wanted. Joe growled at the memory of his previous mistakes, vowing to get better at this in the future. What he wanted right now was a rectangular area of effect that covered the entire warehouse and about 10 feet out on each side. That way, it wouldn't affect people that walked by or those that simply lived or worked in the nearby buildings. Reading through his grimoire, he softly sang to himself to help pass the time. Montage. Doing a ritual creation montage. Yeah. Time didn't pass any faster, but after 20 minutes, he stopped mumbling his song and became fully invested in his studies. When his words trailed off, the crackling of turning pages sounded like a whip snapping in the silence of the building. His quills, scratching notes onto some paper, could be heard once every short while. He muttered, "Montage," softly every half hour or so. Eventually, he decided that he should work on the actual creation of a ritual instead of just making notes. Effects I want in this ritual. Exclusion? Yes. Don't want it to affect me or guests. Passive scanning so it isn't active and wasting mana if there are no targets. The goal of the whole ritual? Nausea. Yep, maybe include the feeling of really needing to poo. Maybe actually make them poo if they hang around too long. I can't imagine many people wanting to stick around if they are feeling like that. Joe looked at a few other possibilities, selecting only one more. Exponential increase. Yeah. The closer they get to the ritual circle, the worse the effects are. Exponential increase actually reduced the overall cost of the ritual, because it meant that unless you were right at the epicenter, the effect was lessened severely. Adding limiting factors was a good way to turn a powerful ritual into something usable. But making it specific like that carried its own risks. Now, how to combine these? Exclusion requires a silver chalice be filled with my blood to be placed in the circle. Passive scanning requires a used glass eye. Why? That's disgusting and a little weird. Moving on, the nausea requires the third stomach of a cow, and the poo feeling needs the fresh intestines of a bear. Exponential increase needs an example of exponential growth. Could I use a copper and gold coin? That's exponential growth of cost, at least. Joe wrote down all the details onto a paper before looking through the various ritual circles. Since this will be a beginner tier ritual, I'll need at least 2 different circles. This one is used for affecting all-in area, and this double-lined circle is used to stipulate area this big. Hey, that's the same one I use for Predator's territory. Joe happily created the ritual diagram, frowning when his hand jerked to the side and splashed ink all over the page. Stupid drawing skill being so low. Stupid dexterity, he muttered as he pulled out a fresh sheet and started over. He was able to create the spell diagram this time, and it began to glow a soft gold as he looked at it. Good, good. Now I just need to add in what other components should be needed. I already knew that silver wire was needed for the double-line circle, but what about the target, all circle? Looks like air, water, and fire. How elementary, my dear Watson. He chuckled as he worked. So far, all his new space had done for him was let him study in peace and protect others from his puns. If anyone else were to know about this, they would agree that it was a good investment. Putting the finishing touches on the ritual, he noticed that it was glowing a brighter gold than it was originally, but he also knew he could improve it to a higher degree. He adjusted all the parameters a tiny bit, and over the course of another hour, he fine-tuned all the requirements. Finishing at long last, he smiled at the brightly glowing page and finally acknowledged the notifications waiting for him. New ritual created quarantine area. This ritual was designed specifically to drive off unwanted company. The designer didn't seem to realize that his personality would have worked twice as effectively. As this is the first ritual you have designed, you gain a reward. Because it is a beginner tier ritual, rewards are doubled. Profession, Occultist, 500. Occultist has reached level 2. Speed of reading and writing is now increased by 10%, currently set at 60% bonus. New languages are now 20% easier to learn, written form only. Skill increased, ritual. Lore, beginner 0. Congratulations! Study and practice have allowed you to increase your usage of a skill considered useless by society. You'll prove them right someday, because you are like King Midas, except that instead of gold, everything that you touch seems to turn to turds. Intelligence, perception, and luck, +1. Skill increased, Ritual Magic Apprentice, 4. The creation of your own rituals certainly allows you to increase this skill at a much faster rate. Nice work, earning a skill increase after spending most of your skill points to get this far. Joe kind of wanted to yell at whoever was making these notifications. Seriously? This was bordering on abusive at this point. He double-checked his settings, but it appeared that his notifications were still set to normal. Joe snorted and left the building. It seemed that he needed to purchase some specialized equipment for his ritual, namely animal innards. Doing a bit of shopping turned into a seriously unpleasant chore. When he went to the counter of the general goods store, people laughed at him. It looked like he had grabbed a random pile of garbage. They seemed to think that he didn't understand that most of these items were considered trash drops. Things found in old buildings or from monsters that didn't have any real value. Only the heavily tarnished silver chalice still had any value at all. But it would need to be melted down or sanded and polished to become useful again. He would have bought a better one, but it was literally the only pure silver chalice he had been able to find. Joe's ears felt like they were on fire, and his cheeks were bright red from the embarrassment he was feeling. It was all for the pursuit of magic. He would suffer any humiliation to be able to bend the world to his will. So what if these basic muscle brains couldn't see past the end of their sword? Joe stumbled a bit. Where in the world were these narcissistic tendencies coming from? It was fun to think like that as a joke, but he didn't want to become a person who sneered at other classes of people. Maybe it was just a wizard thing, or aha. He was jumping to conclusions about people. The skill had specifically warned him about this sort of thing. Armed with new knowledge about himself, Joe hurried about his tasks and simply kept his head down. He did his best to ignore the few chuckles he elicited with his strange shopping spree and simply did what he needed to do. After going to the butcher's to get a cow's stomach, he found that he had another problem. He was already carrying too much. Adding on 20 or so pounds of animal intestines certainly wouldn't help the situation. Why did he always need to get extras? How many times was he planning to cast this ritual? Joe made his way back to the warehouse before returning to the butcher's. He was sweating heavily from the swift pace he had needed to set to make his purchase in time. And from the look on the butcher's face, he was sure that his charisma had taken a hit. Joe had to stop himself from retching, from the combination of his run and the smell. I need a cow's third stomach and bare intestines. Do you have those? What in the heck are you going to do with those? The butcher had a Cockney accent so thick that Joe could barely understand him. Joe stared at the man for a long moment as he parsed the words. Oh, does it matter what I want with them? His words caused the butcher's face to darken. All right, I guess it does. It's bait for a trap. We need a specific combination to draw out a large monster. The butcher seemed to think it over. All right, I can do the stomach for a copper, but fresh bare insides is going to be a solid silver. Works for me. Joe handed over the money and got meat wrapped in a slowly seeping sack in return. Thank you. He hurried away. No problem, kiddo. Come on back soon, the butcher replied needlessly. Joe was already across the street by this point. Night was falling, but Joe wasn't overly concerned. How many master-tier Abyss on Earth rituals were out and about in the world? Joe bet that the number was close to 0 at this point. He was pretty sure that the activation of the ritual was why the human city had been attacked by monsters every few nights recently. Actually, if the reason night became so deadly was the ritual he had subverted, nighttime hunting would soon become rather popular. No one liked that they lost half of the time they had to level each day. Though it had been conducive to the rapid advancement of non-combat skills, such as tailoring, didn't matter to him. Joe had a ritual to create. He unlocked the door to the warehouse and walked in. Joe paused. Something felt off. Was there someone in here? He looked around the huge room, but it remained empty. Hello? Obviously, there was no reply. He shook off the feeling and got to work. Having stored the meat in his ring, there was no real rush to complete the ritual. But he really wanted to. Pulling a bucket full of chalk into the center of the huge vacant room, he dropped to his knees and started drawing out the spell circle. The first tier circle went on the outside, so he started with the far more difficult interior magic circle. Halfway through the process, he was intensely happy with his decision to use chalk. It made erasing his many mistakes easy to do, though it pained him every time he needed to redo a section. Maybe when he was a master artist, he would be confident in using a more permanent medium that let him draw more accurately, but for now, chalk would have to do. Very carefully stepping out of the completed portion, Joe began drawing the double-lined circle around the outside. He was using a curved chunk of wood to make the curve, having learned that freehand circles were not to be trusted. When the exterior was complete, Joe wiped his face. He didn't care that he left a long streak of chalk behind. The diagram was complete. Placing all the items he needed in his ring, Joe stepped into the center of the ritual area and began arranging the components. This wasn't a novice circle, so he couldn't just toss everything into the center and hope for the best. Failure to do everything perfectly increased the mana cost or created feedback that could damage him. When all the items were out of his bag, Joe lit a candle, put a feather on a pedestal, filled a bowl with water, and dropped a large stone on the floor. There, that should take care of the elemental components. Next was the chalice of blood. Blech. He pricked his finger and watched the blood flow out and flow and flow. When it was finally over, he was quite dizzy and wishing that he had been able to find a smaller chalice than the one he bought. He healed himself, double-checked that he hadn't scuffed the chalk, and grinned. Time to make the magic happen. He placed the core into the center of the arranged components and began to feed mana into the spell circle. In a flash, 10% of his mana was gone. He gasped and tried to regulate how quickly the mana was pouring out. Joe forced the power back into the proper channels and began to sweat. Controlling the ritual was becoming rather difficult, and the mana required per second was starting to strain his channels. Joe watched as his mana ticked down. 20%, 10%, 5%. The pull of power stopped, and Joe shuddered in relief. His mana regeneration pulled him up to 15% when the draw suddenly began again. What the? The outer circle had its own mana requirement. Oh, crap. The draw of mana was much smaller, but he still reached 0 mana disturbingly quickly. How? His health took a hit before his mana regen kicked in. The accordion effect of health and mana continued for a couple seconds, but the ritual completed in time for him to survive the process. The inner circle of the ritual glowed a sickly green while the outer was colored a clashing vibrant orange. Ritual quarantine area completed. Players who will remain unaffected, Joe. Once active, this ritual will remain for 6 months until maintenance is needed. Activate ritual now. Yes or no? Might as well. Joe clicked yes and waited for something to happen. He felt nothing but did notice that his mana was entirely empty. Not wanting to waste the opportunity, Joe quickly sat down and worked to squeeze all of his mana into a perfect sphere as it regenerated. The storm of power in his mind shrunk noticeably, his wisdom score quite a bit higher than it had been the last time he worked to improve this ability. Skill increased. Coalescence Novice. 9. You stand at the peak of novice-ranked coalescence. Work hard and think deep thoughts. Deeper. Oh, that's your limit? Skill increased. Mana Manipulation, Novice 7. Guiding huge waves of energy through your body without damaging yourself is the mark of a true magical artist. But if that is the case, it appears that this is yet another area where you are still using crayons. He was happy about the skill increases, but he may need to send a message to customer support if those notifications kept being so personal. Seriously, it was getting... What in the heck is that? Joe shrieked as he jumped to his feet. A splatter of bile found a new home on the floor, rapidly followed by a body covered in a garish red robe splashing into the newly formed puddle. Joe moved away as the invader tried to stand up, but they failed and puked again, followed by a nasty rumbling sound from their pants. Joe thought about trying to help the man, but the smell coming from the collapsed man certainly wasn't convincing him to get close. He sent a few ranged healing spells at the man, not fixing the bones broken in the fall, but keeping the man awake and alive. It also helped the smell a tiny bit. As the unknown man groaned, Joe got over his squeamishness, reminding himself that he had been in far more disgusting scenarios during his time in the army. He walked forward and grabbed the man by the arm, dragging him to the wall of the warehouse and further away from the ritual's center. Here the ritual had far less effect, though the man's face still seemed quite green. Who are you? And why are you in here? This is private property. I was just trying to find a place to sleep, the man replied piteously. If Joe hadn't caught a crafty gleam in his eye, or perhaps the ornate robes that screamed wealth, or that the man had been in the rafters, he may have believed him. Totally a believable lie from this guy. Oh, in that case, I'm sure you wouldn't mind me charging you rent for the evening. Joe grabbed the dangling coin purse, threaded into the man's belt, carefully avoiding the stained portion of his pants. He pulled the bag open, spilling gold coins into his palm. Ah, yes. I can see that a hotel is out of your price range. Good thing you came here, son. He looked up in time to see the man thrusting his hand at him. Joe jumped to the side, somehow executing a perfect barrel roll and landing on his feet. Stamina already depleted from that simple action, Joe watched as a bright line of heat flew across the room and reduced an empty crate to ashes. I'll take that to mean you aren't here for my health. Buddy, chi. Joe grabbed the unknown mage and dragged him closer to the center of the room. Then he slammed his scepter into the man's broken hand until he heard the bones snap. That should keep more powerful spells from being used against him. Now we're going to have a little chat, you and I. Filthy rogue mage! The man on the ground was doing his best to squirm away from the ritual, but Joe kept him in place with the simple expedient of kicking him in the face when he tried to roll. When the college gets this information, you will be drawn and quartered. Joe sank into a squatting position. Well then, it looks like I will just need to keep you from reporting in. The mage's face paled, enunciating the green caste it had gained. They already know about you. Why else would I be here if I weren't simply gaining the proof they needed to take you? Again, not offering much incentive to letting you go, Joe healed the man, followed by rolling him a bit closer to the ritual circle. The mage released a keening sound as his bowels rumbled. Just more proof of your twisted magic. The mage was gasping, a riot of emotions shifting across his face. I think we need to go ahead and get to know each other better. The look in Joe's eyes didn't inspire much confidence in the captured mage. Shall we begin? Chapter 32. So tell me again why people who learn magic outside of the mage's college are evil. Joe was sitting in a chair, looking at the man he had bound with thin rope. It was thin because the man had multiple broken bones, and the way he was tied made it impossible to attempt escape without severe damage to his already mangled limbs. The mage appeared happy to spew vitriol at him. You commoners can't understand the sheer responsibility and dedication required of a licensed mage. We who can create and shape the elements need the security and brotherhood only found within the halls of academia. So mages only shape the elements? Joe was doing what he could to read between the lines, but he wasn't a trained interrogator. Of course. Anything else is a perversion of the natural order. The mage shouted at him, gasping as he pulled against his bindings. What about clerics, the holy healing powers granted by deities? The mage snorted derisively. Keep your parlor tricks and emotional casting. What we care about is others stealing from our domain or using unholy magic they cannot hope to understand. Your rituals are a good example of what the truly insane will attempt. How did you become aware of me anyway? That was the crux of the matter for Joe. Where had he slipped up? You walked up to the city proclaiming for all to see that you consider yourself a mage, then hid behind your facade of lies. The mage somehow seemed to be looking down on him, an impressive feat, as his robe had filth seeping into it. You probably don't even deserve to be called a cleric either. What true class are you hiding? Ah, so it was when I switched over to my mage class to hunt. Joe nodded to himself. A question for you. Tell me, how do you rank in the college? I am a mage of wind and fire, assistant to the assistant professor. The mage's answer seemed overly proud of this fact. Pretty low, then. Joe decided to use a different tactic. "Tell me, oh nameless mage, how does the college get its money? Tuition and grants from the kingdom? Grants, you say?" Joe rubbed his chin. "Is that so? I know the tuition is high. I'm told 2 skills cost 1,000 gold to learn. This means there must not be many students, certainly not enough to make a dent in the school's apparently endless budget. Why, in your opinion, does the kingdom pay such a high amount of grant money?" The man glared at him. "Is there a point to all of this?" Yes. Come on now." "Obviously, it is because there is no other place to get magical training, weapons, or defenses." The mage snorted at the foolish man questioning him. "How interesting," Joe drawled as the pieces fell into place. "So the mage's college is the only place where magic comes from. And they also happen to send out assassins against anyone who finds their own way to practice magic. The cost to become licensed is sky high as well. To me, it sounds like the college just likes to have a monopoly on the magical market, and so they murder any competition. Let me guess, if you create something or serve a team fighting against the wolf men, does the mage's college take a percentage of the profit you make? A large percentage. What? Of course they do. How else can we repay them for the learning and magic we are able to perform?" The mage seemed pale for a different reason. Joe was digging into his beliefs now. "Usually, that would be what that tuition you bragged about is for. You know, pay for the skills, the training, so on. Then go off and do your own thing, like every other profession that exists." Joe could see dark realization forming in the young man's eyes. "Don't worry. I know what it is like to be milked of every copper by the college you thought was trying to prepare you for the future. As it turns out, you are oftentimes better learning on your own." The mage was slack-jawed and couldn't find anything to say in reply. No one questioned the mage's college. It was against their policies. Joe tilted his head back as he spoke out loud. "So now what, I wonder? I can't simply let you run back and tattle on me. I suppose I could keep you here and use you for my rituals." "No. You will not use me as some sort of foul sacrifice to summon demonic beings." The mage began to struggle heavily, even though he was obviously in great pain. "What in the world?" Joe looked shocked at the thought. "Of course I won't do that. I'm the champion of a deity." "Why would you think that would be allowed?" "I meant that I need a second member of my coven to activate more powerful rituals. This one almost killed me, and it is only a beginner tier. I can create apprentice rituals, maybe even expert tier if I need to. But I need people to join me in powering them. You seem to have access to mana already, so why not?" "You want me to join you in this proscribed activity?" The mage seemed to be about to faint. "Yes?" "No." "Well, dang. I was really hoping it wouldn't come to this." Joe sighed and pulled out his black book. He walked over to the table and began collecting circles and components onto a list. No matter how loudly the Tide Mage shouted, he was unable to break Joe's concentration. As the sun rose in the morning, Joe looked down at a new ritual that glowed a lovely golden color. He sighed, looked at the mage who had either fallen asleep or fainted, and got to work. Out came the chalk, and Joe tried to keep quiet as he scratched the symbols onto the floor. The ring he drew up was large enough for a bed and a chair, about 10 feet in diameter. Since he had made this ritual so very specific, the components were cheap, and he had them readily available. The silver chalice was once again filled with his blood, and yet again, he grumbled about not being able to find or buy a smaller one. The captured mage groaned as the noise woke him up, blinking at Joe in obvious confusion. Fear flashed across his face as Joe stabbed him in the hand and began collecting the blood that dripped from the wound. What are you doing?" His voice was hoarse, all the yelling the previous hours coming back to bite him. Joe looked him in the eye without blinking. "Making a ritual, of course. I just started to get good at it, and I need some practice." He stepped to the side as the mage began to thrash, trying to move his broken body out of the circles surrounding him. He couldn't move at all without his bonds twisting his broken bones, so his attempt ultimately failed. "I don't want to be practice," the mage whispered as tears formed in his eyes. Joe ignored him as he placed the blood in its position. He stepped out of the circle and looked at the whimpering mage. "You came in here with the intent to either kill me or get me killed. You cannot be too surprised that I would seek retribution on you. I ask again, will you help me willingly?" Joe looked at the pitiful figure on the ground, hoping that he would accept his offer. "I can't." The young mage's words burst out in a terrified scream. "Every mage has to sign the accords when they start school and when they graduate. This has to be done before they get their license. Even you travelers sign it. At least a few who have graduated or came into this world as full-fledged mages. I can't willingly work with you. I'd die. Plus, I don't even want to help you. Firstly, stop screaming at me. If you want to speak against what I have to say or you think I am wrong, give me reasons why I am wrong. Improve your argument. Next, why in the world would you sign something that kills you if you help someone?" Joe was looking at the man, aghast at the words, even as a darker conspiracy theory tickled against his senses. "I didn't know. No one knew," the mage howled at him. "It's a binding contract. It forces us to follow the will of the Archmage. Since the lifespan of mages ranges into multiple hundreds of years, everyone that worked together to create the accords had died before he made them mandatory for inclusion in the college. They hide the minor negative ramifications like this for good reason. The accords were made to protect us and ensure that we work together as a society. Until now, I have always seen them as the greatest good, the thing that set us apart from the common rabble outside our walls. We have courses on the Accords and how it protects us against the rogue mages that have tried to destroy us in the past. Minor negative ramifications? Taking away your freedom for an elusive protection is never the solution. When are you protected? Give me examples of people attacking your college. When were your accords made? Who voted on them? Or were they forced upon your people? Who decided to hide important information from you until you had already signed them? Joe looked sadly at the suddenly silent mage. Tell me, what did your older mages say about the accords? Nothing? The mage paused, suddenly seeing the discrepancy. Actually nothing. They weren't required to teach those classes, and we were always directed to the younger generations if we asked. Looking back, they seemed sad, angry. I don't understand. What's your name? Joe asked the man quietly. Cell, he answered, lost in thought. Panic appeared on his face. No, I told you my name. Fiend. Joe rolled his eyes. Yeah, I never needed your name for magic. I have your blood. I'm just trying to be nice and stop calling you the puke and poop-covered mage in my head. Thank you for the information. He thought that he had heard enough, so he stepped back and concentrated on the ritual. Hope this works. His words didn't comfort Cell in the slightest. The mage's eyes widened as he watched the mana flowing out of Joe. Since Joe was always doing his best to cut out distractions, he had never watched the process from the outside. As much as Cell hated to admit it, this was a beautiful piece of spell work. Mana poured into channels that were already prepared for it, creating strong bonds and links throughout. The spell form lashed out and converted the supplied components to energy, pulling what it needed into the ritual and turning the remainder to vapor. It almost looked like a lightning strike. The only thing different was the core. When the mana struck out at it, the core simply dimmed a bit. Cell felt a strange pull inside of himself and gasped as the power from the ritual settled upon him like a blanket. He tried to escape once again, but his bonds forced him to remain still. Joe stood up, brushed off his knees, and watched as the ritual began to complete around Cell. The seconds ticked by, and the power piling atop Cell seemed to slowly vanish. After a full 5 minutes, Joe nodded and stepped over the ritual circles. He untied the mage, preemptively apologized, and pulled one of his broken bones into place. Cell screamed, but the sound seemed to echo strangely when Joe pulled the next bone into place. The young mage passed out. After Joe had ensured that the bones were where they were supposed to be, he channeled his Lay on Hands spell and healed the mage as best as he could. The bones would take more time to heal naturally, but Joe decided that now would be a good time to practice fixing them. Nothing like a willing and damaged target to hone his skills on. He started small, looking for the fragments floating next to where they were supposed to be. Pushing the shard into place, he tried to convince the small fragment to bind itself to the larger bone. The chunk of calcium simply ignored his orders. Joe huffed, feeling a bit upset. Why wasn't this working? In every other game, ever, as far as he knew, healing bones wasn't an issue. To be fair, he hadn't really played games. But then again, if he remembered correctly, healing was usually considered a light spell, and he did have access to dark spells, though. Could that work? Joe tried to add darkness to his healing spell, braiding it into the water. To the naked eye, the water flowing from him simply turned black. Inside Cell's body, Joe was able to see the darkness sink into the bone and fragment, acting as an adhesive that held them fast to each other. The darkness didn't vanish even when Joe stopped putting power into it. Since bones didn't have nerves in them, and because the bones remained stable when he moved Cell's arm, Joe had to conclude that the bone was healed. Hopefully, the dark mana would eventually vanish and leave behind a healthy arm, but Joe would need to watch for side effects in the future. Gah! Joe rolled his eyes and almost slapped himself. This was why he had been able to heal his own body to a much higher degree than he could heal others. Joe was already stuffed full of dark and water mana and could manipulate it freely when he healed himself. How had he not practiced with this yet? Joe could only blame his lacking skills on himself. He should have been practicing instead of gallivanting all over Eternia. He was almost spitting mad when he canceled the spell and tested Cell's movement. His face was calm for the first time since they met, so Joe assumed he was out of pain. While the man was still asleep, Joe took the chalice and filled it with Cell's blood. He had to add him to the quarantine ritual, or staying here would remain absolute torture. As he went about his business, he checked the notifications waiting for him. Congratulations for grasping the requirements for a more specialized form of healing without system assistance. Heal has morphed into a higher tier skill, Mend. Your creativity, true knowledge of healing, and usage of the spell has shown a high level of skill and power, boosting your skill ranks greatly. Skill increased, Mend, Beginner 8. Select a target to heal, restoring 5n health, where n equals skill level. Unlike the lower tier skill Heal, Mend is able to heal broken bones. Congratulations, Mend has reached the beginner ranks. Dark Affinity is automatically added to the spell and will heal dark-aligned creatures twice as effectively. No extra effect added. You have created a new ritual, Ritual of Containment. This ritual utilizes the target's stamina to power the ritual and absorbs any mana from the target that is bound into a spell form. If target leaves the containment area, their stamina and mana will be fully drained. Their health will also begin to fall, but can never fall past 10 points due to the effect of this ritual. Health, mana, and stamina will only regenerate once the target has re-entered the circle. To cast this ritual, the target needs to show willingness to be confined. Remaining in the spell circle for a full minute after activation and a donation of their blood can be used to show their willingness. More targets can be added to the same ritual with a donation of blood. This ritual can be deactivated at will by Joe. Joe had built the at-will deactivation functionality into the ritual for a very simple reason. It was very unlikely that anyone could change the ritual and have it remain effective. This way, if someone got a hold of his rituals and tried to use them against him, he could quickly end the ritual and save himself. He planned on adding this as a safety function to all of his rituals, though it added about 10% mana cost to the overall diagram. Rituals could be activated and used by anyone, so it was better to create a way to protect himself now than be betrayed in the future by his own work. Cell woke up right about then, moving slowly as his mind tried to convince him he was still injured. What did you do to me? I feel not good, but no longer damaged. Well, I healed you and added you to the exceptions listing of the ritual over there, so you won't feel sick, and you shouldn't be all sorts of mangled. I have a couple more questions for you before we are done. Namely, do you think the Mages College is withholding assistance from the kingdom? I've seen a lot of warriors and archers that have a couple magical abilities, but I haven't seen any mages out hunting down wolf men, I guess. I am unsure. I know that there have been messengers coming to the college for years, and any of them that seem to be on official business always leave looking like they have been eating lemons. It was always a point of pride to us seeing the heralds of the kingdom be turned away like commoners. Now it just seems wrong. As Cell was speaking, he was inspecting the ritual he was surrounded by. He was trying to be sneaky, but had a very poor poker face. Joe watched as the man obviously began to create a spell. Cell thought he was keeping his hands hidden in his robe, but the motions had the whole thing wiggling and moving around. You said that the older mages don't say anything about the accords. Is there any reason that the accords would affect them differently? Sure, Cell responded distractedly. When mages are allowed to specialize to their second class or graduate, they sign the accords a second time. They sign a third time before they are allowed to specialize further. When they sign the third time, they have full rights and privileges as a master or professor. That is also when they stop talking about the accords, now that I think about it. In my head, it was always because they no longer needed to worry about them. Instead, it could be winds of immolation. Joe stood silently as the crazed look of glee slowly slid from Cell's face. He was posed in an awkward position, his hands pointed at Joe. He wiggled his fingers a bit more and frowned. Joe coughed into his closed fist to regain Cell's attention. Last question for you then. If the accords were somehow destroyed, do you think the mages in the guild would turn against the Archmage and help the kingdom? Cell looked rather shaken. You took my spell-casting ability? You unbelievable monster. Pretty sure you just tried to light me on fire, Joe responded dryly. Answer the question. No, they would not turn against him, Cell growled as he started to sidle away from Joe. They'd all be dead. All of us would. anyone who signed the accords. There's a repercussion clause against a foreign power gaining control over the college. We'd all die instantly if the accords were destroyed. Joe looked at the ground, nodding and thinking to himself. Seeing his distracted state, Cell started sprinting toward the exit. 10 feet from his starting position, he crossed the lines of the ritual, instantly falling flat as his stamina and mana were drained from him. He began to scream weakly as the ritual latched onto his health and began to pull. Ever so slowly, Cell was able to roll himself into the ritual area again. Joe watched all of this happen with a callous gaze. The mage had tried to kill him several times now. Simply keeping him contained was Joe's way of being merciful. Thank you for the information, Cell. I've decided that you will be helping me for the next few weeks. However unwillingly that might happen. Let's start now. While Cell looked on, trembling from fear, Joe spent the next half hour writing out the ritual diagram for Gravedigger's Requiem. When it was finished, he looked it over, double-checked the circles and markings, and began to place the components in their positions. The final item was his scepter, and he felt a bit naked without it at his hip. Taking a bit of Cell's collected blood from his storage ring, he added it to the mana donor section. When he was ready, he took a deep breath and began empowering the ritual. His mana started to stream off of him, and he was very careful to keep it flowing along the proper channels from the beginning. It'd be nice to increase his mana manipulation at the same time. As the first circle finished becoming powered, Joe looked at his mana and noticed that it had been draining like normal. As the second circle started to draw power, he watched as his mana dipped all the way to only a quarter full. At that point, Cell suddenly yelped, and mana stopped escaping from Joe's body. He watched the mage try to control himself, but his face was paling rapidly. Just before he would have collapsed, Joe's mana began to drain once more. The ritual completed just as Joe's mana touched 20%, and he whooped as he saw that the tag-lock needle on his scepter seemed to be distorting the air around it. It was vibrating softly and releasing a faint musical chime. Joe was concerned that the vibration might be damaging the needle, but after watching the durability for a minute, he was certain that he was simply paranoid. Though he was very excited to test this out, he really needed to get some sleep first. I feel so violated. You used me like a battery? Joe finished for the captured mage. You make a pretty good power, Cell. He looked at the confused man, waiting for a reaction. I make a good what? Power, Cell. Power what? Stop saying my name. Cell balled his fists and roared at the ritualist. Joe tisked and looked away. I'll go get you a bucket of water and a clean set of robes. Then I'm going to bed. You should try to rest up. We have lots of work to do. Joe strolled away, tiredness obvious in his voice. He had been up overnight, and he was feeling it now. When Cell was alone, his brow furrowed. My mana manipulation skill increased. Chapter 33. Joe woke up feeling refreshed and cheerful. Sure, he didn't have a team to hunt with. Yes, the quests that he currently had were long-term and vastly difficult. No, he didn't have a clear way to reach his goals. Joe suddenly wasn't feeling quite as cheerful. He decided that before going back to the research and development of his rituals, that it might be a good time to return to the library and look for some easy quests that he could complete between studying and creating rituals. He stepped out of the guild building and winced at the bright light flooding the area. Whoops. It was later in the day than he had thought. Joe started trotting toward the library. The position of the sun showed him that it was already early afternoon, and he wanted to make sure to find some good information before the library closed for the evening. It wouldn't be a good idea to mess with his sleep cycle too much, so he should try to do his work during daylight hours. He walked into the library, waving at Boris. The old man glanced up, nodding at him, and then did a double take. Hey, how are you a level 2 scholar? I haven't rewarded you for any quest completions. Who is giving unauthorized quests? Is it Mobius? It is, isn't it? I told him that It wouldn't be a good idea to explain where the level actually came from, so Joe decided on a half-truth. No, sir. No one else gave me a quest. I got a special reward for completing a quest for the kingdom. The kingdom? How did they give you experience toward your scholar job? Boris, for good reason, didn't believe the story he was being fed. It wasn't scholar-specific. Part of the reward was experience toward your profession. I really cannot tell you much more. Joe tried to appear as sincere as possible. Fine. Keep your secrets like those impotent mages at the college. Stupid Nation is getting shrouded in mystery. Ooh, I don't tell other people what's going on. I'm so surprised that we aren't advancing and need to do everything twice. Boris spat sarcastically. Whatever. Well, you advanced to level 2. Just perfect. Why not? You are already a special case. All right, you didn't bring any new information into the library, and you never advanced our cause. Sorry about that? Joe looked up at the man with a hopeful grin. Well, rules are rules, even when they are stupid. You are level 2 as a scholar. You now have access to the uncommon book section. I would suggest that you try to get to the 3rd level the correct way. Otherwise, other scholars may start becoming antagonistic toward your special treatment. To that end, you can gain job experience in a few ways, either by doing research and creating something from the books that no one else has been able to, completing a quest you find in the books that you confirm with me before you run off, or the standard way, which is to bring back lost or forgotten knowledge and donate it to the Society of Scholars. You know about quests in the books that haven't been completed. Joe was excited to hear about this. Maybe he wouldn't need to hide his ability to find secret quests. What do you mean? Of course I know. Did you know? Boris looked at Joe like he had insulted his mother. Ugh, just go take a look around the uncommon book area. Your face is bringing back bad memories, even though you don't look like a walking corpse anymore. Rude, Joe snorted, and walked up the stairs leading to the 2nd level. At the top was a sign warning off anyone who didn't have access to the uncommon section. Walking through the archway that denoted the entrance to the room, he felt as though he had just walked into a thick spider web. Joe shivered, brushing at himself before realizing that it was probably a security measure against intruders. Looking around the empty room, he smiled and activated his job's special ability to see books containing truth. He beamed as he looked at the golden glow coming from the shelves. This section had far fewer fully black books, though not all the books here glowed brightly. Maybe this was the distinction between common and uncommon books. The fact that the information was more accurate, or maybe from a more reliable source. Either way, Joe had some work to do. He was happy to see that the ritual from the 1st floor had been in range of this room as well. This was easy to notice because the section he was looking at contained a lovely gradient of colored leather. It was too bad the books didn't all have titles. It would have made finding the information he was pursuing far easier to attain. He pulled a few books down, trying to get a feel for whatever sort of material they contained. It seemed he was in a section that had never interested him in reality. But here it was, a potential gold mine. History. In Eternia, history could be more accurately labeled lore. It was fun, interesting, and wrong. Joe read through the 1st chapter with a twitching left eye. The book was wildly embellished and inaccurate. Drat. Whoever had written this had gotten a good chunk of the facts correct, but had been trying to flatter whatever noble house they were a part of. The cover still glowed a soft gold, but Joe felt that his eyes were deceiving him. What he really needed was to... A thought crossed his mind, a thought that made him very hopeful. He put the book on a small table, grabbed a few pages, and tried to will the pages to jump to pertinent information. The pages fluttered, and when he looked at the resulting page, yes, the words on this page were shining a bright gold, the specific coloration he had found, which signaled a clue to creating a quest. This part was about an investigator who had a perfect record for only punishing criminals. Everyone else who was captured, who was innocent, was let go almost instantly. His story was a sad one, unfortunately, because he was targeted by various groups who had an interest in ensuring their dark deeds went unpunished. The author of the book thought that the assassin who killed the investigator had been funded by a noble house, and because of the glow of the words, Joe was able to see that his thoughts had been correct. So this, if I find more information, will it become a hunt of the noble house, the abilities of the investigator, or something else entirely? Joe debated for a moment. Should he really take the first quest that he found? Maybe he should look over some other options. He started skimming through other books, but his mind kept wandering back to the partial information he had found. How can I call myself a completionist if I don't take and complete every quest possible? He sighed and began searching through other books that were on either the same or a similar subject. Another hour passed, and he finally was able to put together a comprehensive and detailed version of events. No quest prompt appeared until Joe added a small part about how the investigator had left detailed instructions on understanding criminals in a place where criminals were sent to repent. Quest created, Seeker of Truth. An influential investigator met an untimely end due to his relentless pursuit of criminals. He may have left detailed records of how he was able to sniff out evildoers. Follow the clues you have found and find the truth for yourself. Reward, unknown. Penalty, for failure, none. Accept? Yes or no? Joe accepted the quest and walked downstairs with his notes. He needed to talk to Boris and make sure that this was an acceptable quest for a scholarly reward. Boris, got a quest here. Would you look at it and approve it? Boris's head jerked up off his desk and he blinked, tired-eyed. Boy, you do know that some of us have other things to do at night. We were supposed to close an hour ago. Let me see the quest you found. He snatched Joe's notes and looked over the details. Joe had included references showing which book and page he had gained the information from. Interesting. But how does this help our society? Since I am uncertain what our society does as a whole, I figured it would be useful for us to have these methods of determining truth from people. That way we could validate information coming to us from third parties. Joe's words made Boris nod softly. It would indeed be useful if it exists. He tapped his chin a few times and nodded. All right. I approve this quest as a suitable scholarly mission. I'll add on 50 points toward your job upon quest completion. 100 if you are able to secure the techniques described here. Yes, you get points even if you bring back nothing. Quest rewards updated. Seeker of Truth. Rewards unknown. Profession, experience 100. Failure, none. Profession, experience 50. Excellent. Now that quest was fully worth attempting. Joe waved at Boris, who scowled and started locking the doors to the library. Maybe he should get Boris a fruit basket or something to cheer him up. He was rather nice, no matter the curmudgeonly aura he exuded. Joe started walking toward the... oh dang, his prisoner. He hurried back to his rented warehouse, entering and rushing over to find an unconscious mage, Zell. Shoot, totally dehydrated. I never gave him drinking water or food today. After the ritual emptied him out too. Ugh, I'm a terrible medic. He channeled cleanse into the collapsed mage, getting his water levels to a stable point. After a long minute, Zell stirred and woozily glared at Joe. You left me here. I thought you were going to let me die. You could have used the water to drink. Joe tried to defend himself. Or at least changed and cleaned up a bit. You seriously smell. Is that my fault? Zell howled and jumped to his feet. You left the bucket of water over there. He pointed, and sure enough, a bucket of full water was patiently waiting to be used about 5 feet from the edge of the ritual. Ah, sorry about that. Joe scratched his head sheepishly. I've never had to take care of a detainee. Slipped my mind. Slipped your... Zell slid to a sitting position with an unpleasant squelch. I'm going to die here, aren't I? Stop being so dramatic. Joe rolled his eyes. So long as you are at least a little alive, I can drag you back to full health. I am a cleric, after all. So there's no escape, Zell whispered with wide eyes. Drama queen, Joe groaned as he rubbed his bald head. Look, I'm going to eat some food. Would you like some? Zell's stomach rumbled at the mention of food. Joe was unsurprised. A noble brat like this had likely never had to miss a meal, or even skimp a little. Pulling some food out of his storage ring, Joe handed over a basic sandwich and waited for Zell to start before he ate his own. Look, I'm going to bring that bucket over, and here's a spare set of clothes. Try to clean up, get changed, and get some sleep. Tomorrow we are going to do more rituals. Hey, can I call you Tate? What? No, my name is Zell. Why would you want to call me Tate? Zell asked suspiciously. It's short for potato. Zell didn't blink, but his hands trembled. And why would you want to call me Potato? Because much like the noble potato, you are not a battery, but you are going to be used as one. Joe chuckled as he brought over a pillow and thin blanket for Zell. Sleep well, Tate. I'm going to light you on fire when I escape, Zell whispered as he watched Joe leave the building. As the door closed, all light in the building vanished, leaving him in a large and hopefully empty space. Small scratching sounds reaching his ears made sleep difficult that night. Chapter 34. Joe awoke with a positive outlook on life. Something about going 2 days in a row with his only wound being a paper cut just felt right. He had a nice breakfast, storing an extra plate of food for Zell because he deserved a pleasant surprise. Grabbing his notes, he went to the store for more paper, ink, and a spare quill. He also purchased another bucket of chalk from a nearby art supplier. It wouldn't be good to run out when he needed it. Joe was walking back to the warehouse when he noticed that the roads were quiet. Very, very quiet. He reached for his scepter, getting a firm hold on it just as his senses screamed at him to move. He jumped as hard as he could, reaching rooftop level just as the entire road seemed to explode. A hurricane-force updraft from the massive flame threw him to the side, and he landed heavily on the rooftop. He took no damage from the fall, his Jumplomancer class coming into effect. The blast did take 10 points off his health, a sickening amount since he was nowhere near the epicenter of that attack. He looked around, trying to find who had attacked him. Ha! Had some kind of a shield up, did you? Mage armor? Blast through you clear to the roof, a jovial voice called to him. Not many people get to see volcanic conflagration and live to talk about it. You impress me. Impress you enough to make you go away. Joe looked around. eyes narrowing as he saw a beefy mage in a bright red robe talking to him. How had he missed seeing that? "Why did you attack me? Who are you?" That should be an easy answer for you. The mage's face and voice turned dangerously furious. "Not only are you a rogue mage, but you also killed one of the most promising fire mages of this generation. Where did you hide Cell's body?" "I certainly did not kill him," Joe shouted at the man. If the spell he was creating was any indication, the mage didn't seem to believe him. "See this? Nasty little spell called lava worms. Not all that useful in a war. The damage over time is quite small. Torture, though? Well, this spell is great for that. The worms burrow into you and start swimming around. Painful. Very painful." There was dirt flying up, collecting and liquefying in the intense fire he was generating. "I'm strong enough to keep them hot till they reach your brain. You have until that point to tell me where his body is." Joe prepared his scepter. There was no way he was letting that stuff swim through his body. The mage wasn't listening to reason, so there was nothing to lose. All or nothing at this point. Joe had recovered only a very small amount of stamina from that jump, and had been hoping to use it to escape. It wasn't going to happen. This man was far too powerful for that. He knew the mage would eventually track him down, even if he somehow escaped right now. So he wasn't even going to try. Joe jumped off the roof and swung down, hoping that his ability to fall at half damage would save him from his own recklessness. The mage snorted as Joe fell at him. "I have mage armor too, you moron." "I'm fully trained, so mine isn't a flimsy covering either. I may as well be wearing plate armor." Undeterred, Joe swung as hard as he could, even as lava worms entered his legs with an excruciating, searing pain. His scepter hit, but the bulk of it seemed to bounce off as if it had just impacted a wall. Dexterity check failed. Joe belly-flopped onto the steaming street, losing over a quarter of his health at once. The mage made a dismissive gesture, and a fireball took off most of Joe's exposed skin and eyebrows as he was slammed bodily into a nearby building. What was that supposed to accomplish? You're even closer to death now. "Don't worry, foolish little warlock. I know that you travelers are restored by the gods in the city square a few hours after you perish. That's why I am not worried about killing you. Not at all. When you come back, I'll be there. You will die as many times as needed to ensure that you stay dead." The mage lifted a hand, and fire began collecting in his palm. Yes," Joe managed to croak out through his charred lips. The lava worms were ravaging his insides. "Oh, still able to speak?" The mage was about to continue, but a strange chiming noise filled his ears. "And now I have tinnitus. Great. I was too close to the blast zone. Now I need to pay for an overrated healer." Joe blinked, and within that moment, the mage vanished into the street. Through fluttering, mostly gone eyelashes, he was able to see. "You have chosen to activate Gravedigger's Requiem. The ritual lasts for 10 seconds after activation." Huh. At that point, the lava worms reached his brain, and he was unable to heal himself from the catastrophic damage to his gray matter. "You have died. Calculating. You were attacked in a safe zone by an NPC that was set as non-hostile. Your alignment with the Mage's College. Neutral. NPC reason for attacking. Death of student. Reason for attack. Invalid. No action was taken that should have flagged you for assault. Error. Safe area. Please have patience, this issue is being elevated." A short time passed before a new message appeared. "Alrighty. Let's see here. Oh, you again. Huh?" Setting your notifications to extra snarky didn't drive the point home. You are still breaking things. Let's take a look. Huh. No. For once you were the wronged party. If the mage had attacked you because you took his student captive, we would be having a different talk right now. But technically, you were in a safe zone at a safe time, and you were still attacked by a mage who was not supposed to attack you. Here's my take on this. 3 hours till you respawn, no loss of experience. I'm also giving you a temporary boost to your reputation with the college for 6 hours when you respawn. You'll be set to reluctantly friendly. That should give you enough time to make your case before turning into a human tiki torch. Good luck. Stop breaking my world, or I will break you. Love, Certified Altruistic Lexicon. Joe felt a bit leery about this situation. He'd just got a signed note from the AI in control of the entire game. He had specifically been told not to draw the AI's attention. While he was out of the game, he did a bit of reading and called his mom. She was ecstatic, of course. He was calling her so often now. For her, it was only a little over a day since the last time they talked, though for him it was 2. Joe told her about his new friends, and she told him about how she had been on perpetual vacation after she had gotten the winnings from her lottery ticket and sent him off. There were a few sad moments, such as when she asked when he would be coming to visit. Really, there was nothing he could say about that, so he just shook his head and told her it would be a long, long time. When they finally ran out of things to say, they reluctantly hung up, and Joe flopped into the fluffy chair that he was able to create in the area. The time passed quickly with a nap, and an alarm woke him up 5 minutes before he was allowed back into the world. He got himself ready and stepped into Eternia as the portal appeared. A very familiar and unpleasantly smiling face was waiting for him. In fact, it was the first thing he saw. Why, hello there. Let's talk about how you managed to drop me a kilometer under the ground, shall we? Joe winced. The bright red robes were covered in filth, and the mage himself was heaving with what appeared to be barely suppressed anger. If he was this furious after what would have been 6 hours. Oh, hey there. It's such a surprise to see you. I bet it is. The mage's hand burst into flame, and he started reaching for Joe's face with a maniacal grin on his face. Your apprentice is alive, you know. Joe tried to keep his tone conversational as his eyelashes curled from the heat. But if I don't get him some food and water soon, he won't be. The flaming hands stopped moving closer, but also didn't back away. If you are lying to me, I will burn every bit of your skin off before digging into the next layer. I will peel you like a potato. Joe snorted a laugh, making the mage's threats trail off in confusion. A potato? Ha! Tell Cell that you called me a potato. He will laugh. I swear. Let's go. He is really alive? He told you his name? The mage couldn't seem to reconcile his expectations with reality. Yeah, we're totally friends now. Joe cautiously started walking away, moving toward his warehouse. I don't believe you. Cell's company is not something a person enjoys. The mage snorted with annoyance. I can always kill you later, so let's go save my apprentice. What if he doesn't want to be saved? Joe asked in a serious tone. What if when he sees you, he tells you to leave? He might come up with all manner of excuses, like telling you I am trapping you, I'm his new best friend, or that I'm actually a powerful mage and you should run away. Haughtily, the mage looked Joe up and down. I think that you used your most powerful spell already. I think it had no effect on me because I possess the dual affinities for earth and bee and simply unburied myself. I see no need to run from you, and I will explain this to him. Then you both will explain what the abyss is going on. They walked in silence for a few minutes before the mage started talking again. "So, you are an earth mage? Or whatever the equivalent is for a self-trained hedge witch like yourself?" "Actually, no. I'm not really sure how I got on the college's watch list. I have a single spell that could be classified as a mage ability, but I got it from my deity. I'm actually a cleric. A single mage spell is enough to draw us to you. Why didn't you register with the college? You had to have heard of the consequences." "Why should I register? Where is the benefit to me? I'm not looking for training or to boost my mage capabilities." Joe carefully lied. "Why should I pay a king's ransom simply not to be attacked for a spell I gained via divine providence?" The mage thought on that for a few minutes as they approached the warehouse. "I see your point, but it doesn't matter. If you have a single mage class spell, you need to sign the accords. It is the only way we have been able to maintain order in the kingdom. It is what keeps powerful mages out of politics and government positions." Joe kept his voice calm and tried to remain collected. "What if I simply cannot afford to pay? I am in a noble guild and am a guild officer. What if we made it a personal quest to kill you all? We are travelers. We'll keep coming back if you kill us. Can you say the same?" "I also took a quest directly from the Queen in the last few days. Is it really wise to make an enemy out of a huge portion of the population, especially those you can't kill off, simply because they are using the abilities given to them? And it was given to me. I did not study for it or find my spell lying around. It was a quest reward." "But why not sign the accords?" The mage seemed frustrated, like Joe wasn't hearing him. "All you need to do is list out your magical abilities, pay the 100 gold, and inform a certified teacher if you gain more magical abilities. You can keep your spell and you will just need to pay a percentage of quest rewards to the college. You won't be a licensed mage and cannot attain rank or training in your spells, but you won't be hunted down." Shock was written across Joe's face. "What? I can just go in and get access to the accords? I was told that the only way was to join the college and become a licensed mage for multiple thousands of gold." The mage rubbed his temples. "This is why I told them we needed more publicity. Listen, do you have 100 gold?" "I do." "Then if Cell is safe, I will plead your case to the council and the Archmage. Either way, you will be brought into the college tomorrow. If you sign the accords and they witness it, and you haven't killed any mages, I will do my best to make sure you walk away with a clean record." Charisma +1. You have reached an important milestone in the growth of your charisma. As you now have 15 charisma, you can gain access to the basic skill of charismatic people. Speech, skill gained. Speech, Novice 1. Talk your way out of things. Talk your way in. This skill adds a bonus equivalent to your skill level onto your charisma when attempting to convince another person or group of people to do something they normally would not. Only activates via talking. Chance for new or unique access to quests has increased. "That's very nice of you. We are here." Joe distractedly walked up to the door and pulled out his key. As he was unlocking it, the mage coughed. "I'm not feeling very well all of a sudden." Indeed, the contrast of his red robes and green face clearly showed how sickly he was. "That's just the building." Joe motioned for him to wait at the door. "It'll get worse for you the deeper into the building you go. I'll go get Cell. Don't worry about coming in. Also, Cell and I are immune. I'm not going to wait here, and I'm not letting you out of my sight. Let's go." They stepped into the building, and the mage's bowels made a low, moaning noise. "We may need to move a bit faster." "You have a couple options here. If you go further, you will start puking, and well, I'm sure you can feel what else will happen. You can wait here, try your luck, or put some blood in this chalice." Joe pulled the tarnished cup out of his ring. "I'll bring it over there, and you'll feel better right away." Ignoring him, the mage looked across the room where his apprentice was standing. "Cell, you're alive, ye master." Cell could only see silhouettes, as they were framed by the light coming through the doorway. "Don't do anything that man asks you to. He is an evil, conniving—" "Don't worry about him. He will be signing the accords in the morning, Cell," the mage told him equitably. "What? No way. He went out of his way to convince me how evil the college was. He tried to tell me that the accords are shackles that keep us under the thumb of the Archmage, how we are incredibly weak because it is impossible for commoners and rogue mages to enter our ranks." Cell was almost shaking. All of that rhetoric against the college, and he is joining. The mage seemed frozen in place, his face aghast. "He told you all of that?" "Yes. If you went back to the college tonight, would you feel the need to explain your whereabouts and what he told you to your colleagues?" The mage inquired, voice deadly calm. "Of course, I need to discuss this with them, so that we can study the accords further and have a valid explanation against this line of reasoning in the future." Cell's voice trailed off as he saw the shock in his master's posture. "In that case, Cell, I can't take you back with me tonight. You are already on the verge of increasing your rank, and with this information and attitude toward it, I can't allow you to be around other mages until you sign the accords a second time." The mage seemed sorrowful, and his hands were clenched to the point of draining color away. "What are you talking about? Master, you can't mean to leave me here. Why?" Cell shouted across the room in a hoarse voice. "Drat!" Joe had forgotten to leave him drinking water again. "Isn't it obvious, Cell?" Joe crossed his arms and stared at the red-robed mage. "It is because what I said is the truth. Your master is under the same compulsion that you will be a more advanced version of what you are sworn to." "Master Mage, tell me a single negative thing about the accords. Anything at all. Tell me you don't like the quill they made you sign with. Say the font was a dumb choice or that it was written in Comic Sans. Perhaps there was poor lighting in the area it's stored in." The mage opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. Joe snorted through his nose. "As I thought. You can't say anything against it. You also can't let someone go against the accords, am I correct? A stay of execution is the best you can do." Still looking away, the mage made a motion that could almost be considered a nod. His voice came out as a whisper. "I can't let Cell go back right now. If he started speaking out, someone might kill him. I would have to kill him." "Master, no! You can't be serious." Cell sunk to the floor. On his knees, he grabbed his hair with both hands. "We've become little better than slaves. I can't. If you don't think of it like that, life is far more manageable." The mage spoke softly. "Think of the accords as you always have. A force for good in the kingdom. There isn't any other way to justify what we have to do." He struggled to get out the last words and seemed to be in pain, even from that light disagreement. He took a deep, shuddering breath before turning bloodshot eyes to Joe. "I'll come back for you in the morning. Can you keep him here? If you do so and don't cause problems, I'll pay you back half of the fee for signing the accords. Why did you have to explain his position in the—" He coughed blood. "I'll keep him here," Joe promised solemnly. The mage closed his mouth with a loud click, nodded, and turned toward the door. "Master, you can't," Cell called brokenly, standing as close to the edge of his containment as he could get. The mage grit his teeth. You are wrong, Cell. I literally need to, as much as I don't. He started to choke and grabbed at his throat. He was still for a few seconds, then reached into a satchel at his side. 3 bottles that should not have fit into the bag appeared, each glowing a bright blue color. Take these. Whatever you are doing to contain in him, just make sure it holds. Joe held the bottles and tried to inspect them. Perception check failed. Intelligence check versus contextual evidence and past experience. Success. Item acquired, concentrated mana rejuvenation potion ×3. Restores 300 mana over 5 seconds. Triples mana regeneration for 1 minute. Item rarity. Artificially rare. Common. Those are only allowed to be produced or sold in the Mage's College, in case you are wondering why such a useful item isn't found in shops. The mage released a sound that resembled a laugh, but it was obvious that it was simply a strangled saw, yet another product that benefits our great school. Make sure you are here at sunup and don't cause problems for us, or you will be declared a warlock as well as a rogue. Storing the potions, Joe nodded at the mage. The red-robed man made a motion that could be mistaken for wiping his eyes and walked out the door. Retching sounds echoed faintly into the building, but Joe had a feeling that it was not because of his active rituals. Chapter 35. Joe clapped and smiled brightly. Well, that was horrible and heartbreaking. Cell glared at him, tears openly streaming down his face. You are. How can you be so willing to throw yourself into servitude? Cell growled brokenly. You should run while you still can. Vanish into the city. I have no choice but to accept my... He erupted into a coughing fit, surprise written large on his face. Looks like the Accords are punishing you a bit. Joe watched as Cell's face turned purple and the coughs became flecked with blood. He sent a healing spell at Cell, just to be on the safe side. Why don't you eat dinner and get some rest? Why don't you let me ruminate about my fate? Cell choked out a dramatic rebuttal. You do whatever you need to do. Joe pulled out his book on rituals and sat down for a long study session. An hour passed in near silence, the only sound being the scratching of a quill and various soft sobbing noises. Joe looked up when Cell quieted down fully. Your master called me a warlock, then later seemed to change his mind and told me that I would be declared a warlock. I thought that was just a type of spellcaster, someone who debuffs others or summons beings to fight for him. No, well, yes, they can be warlocks. It is a title given to those who break oaths. Not everyone can make a mana contract, and most people don't want to be bound by soul-crushing pain or death if they violate a contract. So they make deals, oaths. If you break your word of honor, you are despised by any who can see the title. Cell seemed to be exhausted. He didn't even look over while speaking. This is one of the few titles that can't be revoked or changed by a deity, since honor is only amongst people. Only the wronged party, a magistrate or the king, can rule against the title and lift the restrictions it imposes. Even then, any but the wronged party can only revoke the title if the reason for breaking the oath was just, such as an oath specifically pledged under duress or for the greater good of the kingdom. That's pretty specific. Joe was quiet for a short while. Sounds like it would be a fairly common title, then. Oh, it is, Cell responded dully. The title fits the oath broken, though. A serious oath, such as leaving your men to die or sacrificing another you pledged to protect, will impact your interactions greatly and give you a negative balance on your karmic luck. Karmic luck? Do you have an explanation for that? Joe perked up. This was one of the few stats he knew nothing about. I don't. All I know is that you never want it to be negative." Cell fell silent again. "I see. Sanimong." Joe kept studying his book, trying to find a way to survive the upcoming day. His eyes lit up as he thought of a single possibility. Reversing it? Would that even work? I can't risk it. What if I changed it? If I added this? No, the power requirement would be too high. Combining it? That might work. I'd need an additional circle, though. Apprentice level, this might get messy. He shuddered and got to work on creating a new ritual. Time began to creep by, and once he finished his work, there were only a few hours remaining until dawn. Joe's eyelids were sagging, trying to force him to accept the embrace of Morpheus. He powered through, keenly feeling the need to stay alive. Fear of potential slavery or death was a good motivator. Joe began drawing out the spell circles, knowing he needed to be precise, but also doing his best to draw quickly. Every time he made a mistake and needed to remake a portion, he growled at himself and his wasteful actions. Skill increase, drawing, Novice 5. Control of the body starts with control of the mind. Control of chalk was supposed to start as a child. Whatever, right? You got a tiny bit better at a mundane task. An hour before dawn, he shook Cell awake. "Cell, I was hoping to ask a favor of you." "Are you being serious right now?" Cell sleepily replied, tiredness and angst coloring his voice. "Why in the world would I help you willingly?" "I'd just really like to survive the day. I have no doubt that once I'm near the Accords, at least one person will try to kill me." Ask yourself this, Cell. Do you want me to sign the Accords or die before I get there? Cell seemed to struggle with himself for a long moment. Grudgingly, he answered, "I want you to sign them." "Thank you, Cell," Joe stated warmly. When he turned so that Cell couldn't see his face, his eyes hardened. He already knew that the Accord subtly influenced the mind of whoever signed them. This was proof that the Accords wanted to grow and impact more people. He remembered the words of the owner of the odds and ends store. An enchanted item was alive, if just barely. He was sure that a magical contract that had thousands ensnared and had lasted for hundreds of years had a more developed ego. It wanted to grow, to have more people trapped in its binding words. Or it could be that Cell wasn't a terrible human being and didn't want a fairly innocent person to die for no reason. Could really go either way. Here's what I need you to do. I am creating a ritual and you don't need to help. I'm just going to give you a mana potion and hope that you keep yourself alive by restoring your mana when the ritual tries to kill you. Thanks. Joe grinned evilly and marched toward the ritual as Cell gave off an indignant squeaking sound. Placing his scepter in the innermost ring, Joe started pouring mana into the ritual. The power draw was massive, with 3 rings, and even with his ability to only pay half of the final cost, the ritual was demanding 1,900 mana. The first circle activated without issue, leaving Joe with mana to spare. The second circle began to pull power and he became a bit worried. When the first had been pulling mana, it was at a rate he was used to. The second one was draining him almost twice as fast. As he approached 10% remaining in his mana pool, the power draw switched over to Cell. The young mage cried out as he felt his mana channels straining to direct the flow of power. Though he really didn't want to help his captor, if he let the power run out of his body in a disordered fashion, he might be torn. Partiert. Joe took this opportunity to drink the first mana potion and felt a sense of relief and clarity as his mana was restored. With triple mana regeneration, he was quickly coming back to full strength. Cell dropped to 5% mana before the burden of the ritual switched back to Joe. He reached for the mana potion with trembling hands, but was caught off guard when Joe managed to say, "No, wait for signal, or we both die." The mage wavered, hesitating as mana exhaustion clouded his thoughts. He was not used to getting his mana pool below half ever. It wasn't allowed since you never knew when a commoner was going to attack you for no good reason. Therefore, all mages were taught to keep half of their mana pool for emergencies. Handshaking, Cell brought the potion bottle to his lips. Joe was focusing on his mana expenditure, watching with awe as his mana regeneration fought against the rapid power suck of the ritual. With triple regeneration for 1 minute, he was generating a tiny bit more than 20 mana a second. It was fascinating to watch his mana decline at what appeared to be a very slow rate, about 10 mana a second. So the ritual was pulling 30 per second. They could do this, they just needed to hold on. Then the third circle began to draw mana. Blood erupted from Joe's mouth as he was unable to contain the flow of mana within his channels. Watching his mana decrease at almost double the previous rate, Joe turned to Cell to give him the signal to start drinking, only to see that his potion bottle was already empty. Cell could see only horror in Joe's eyes as he looked at the little moron. At 5% mana, the ritual switched targets, and Cell screamed. Mana seemed to tear out of him in arcing bolts of energy, and his eyes and mouth had coronas of blue light shining from them. He struggled and failed to control himself, doing everything he could to keep the mana flowing in an orderly fashion. Joe could see the moment that the boosted mana regeneration ended for Cell. He seemed to shrink, almost shrivel, as his power was pulled from him. Joe grabbed the final potion and chugged it just as Cell collapsed. Instantly back to 3/4 full, Joe braced himself and guided his mana along the channel. He wasn't going to make it. Sweat dripped down his face, stinging his eyes as he watched his mana bar trickle toward the halfway point. He gasped and fell as the power draw suddenly vanished, the ritual completing. What? How had it completed? Their vitality should have been drained as their mana ran out. Joe went over the calculations in his head once again. It should have needed 1,900 mana. What was he missing? Spell efficiency. Mana manipulation and coalescence together added 17% efficiency. The mana cost had dropped to 1,577. If he had used the potions himself, he wouldn't even have needed to use all 3. Why did he keep forgetting to account for spell efficiency? He almost screamed aloud about the wasted resources. Notifications interrupted his fury. Skill increase. Mana manipulation. Beginner VI. Congratulations. The forced draining and refilling of your mana has torn open pathways that should have been given weeks to open safely. For reaching the beginner ranks of this skill, an additional effect has been generated based on your usage of the skill to this point. Effect. Add 10% stability to magic that costs more than 30% of your total mana pool to activate. Since I'm sure you don't understand, thanks to your non-existent magical education, spell stability is the statistic that determines how easy it is to keep your mana in the proper channels. Tearing apart your body for greater power is definitely the way to go. Go you. Intelligence +2. Wisdom +3. Constitution -1. Joe began to wheeze as his body deflated. His constitution had dropped below 10 again, and flesh began to drip off of his body like wax from a melting candle. As it touched the ground, it vaporized into sparkling light. Soon, He was again looking down at a wasted form, and standing upright became difficult. A bit hunched over, Joe retrieved his scepter. There was no noticeable effect on it from the ritual's activation. In fact, the taglock seemed almost unnaturally still. Putting it into his storage ring, he shuffled over to Zell and slapped him. 0 damage. Joe growled at the reaffirmation of his destroyed physical stats. He tried again with the same message appearing. A kick. The same. Finally, he just reached into his ring and pulled out a bit of rotten-smelling intestinal meat. Holding that under Zell's nose, he waited as the man began to twitch and groan. "What happened?" Zell mumbled, holding his head. He looked at his now wet hand. It had come away covered in blood. "What happened is that you almost killed yourself because you cannot seem to believe that someone else knows better." Joe barked at him. His voice sounded rough and dry. "What are you?" Zell looked at the Joe's skeletal face and backed away in horror. "I'm a guy that accidentally tore open his mana channels and had his constitution dropped below 10 points. Joe glared at Zell as he turned white. The young mage seemed ready to puke. "Disgusting! I can't believe that could happen." His eyes were wide and appalled. "Now it makes sense why we need to keep our mana pool so high." Joe spat to the side. "There is a terrible bias against taking risks. The rewards can be great. We are always told to play it safe so that everyone else can optimize covering their own butt. The price for me might seem high, but I only lost 1 point of constitution while gaining 2 points of intelligence and 3 of wisdom, not to mention 10% spell stability." "What?" Zell gasped in shock. "Impossible! All you get for overloading your mana channels is a step into your grave. Everyone knows that." "Hold up." Joe put his hand in front of Zell's face. "This everyone you speak of. They wouldn't happen to be the same everyone that are forcing us into signing away our freedom in a few hours. The same people that have lied to you your entire career as a mage?" Zell had no way to respond to that. "I'm betting that there is a whole bunch of information you are missing or have been lied to about. Get ready to go. We don't have long until the mages show up." Joe walked over to the ritual containing Zell, reaching out with his mind and deactivating its effects. Zell had no idea it was off, of course, and simply stood there looking troubled. "Ritual is off. Let's get going. We can wait outside." They moved to the entrance, and after stepping into the open, Joe locked the door and turned around. 5 mages, as well as several guards and crossbowmen, stood waiting for them. A mage coughed delicately, then arched a brow. "Going somewhere?" Joe nodded, keeping his body as straight as possible. "We are. You are the escort to the college?" "Indeed." The mage was in a strange purple robe. "You are going to be silenced until you sign the accords. You will both be unable to cast spells or speak unless I or the Archmage ask you a direct question. Is that clear?" Both Zell and Joe nodded grimly. The mage looked between them. "Anything else to say before we go?" "Moist ointment in rural pulp." Joe enunciated each word clearly. A few of the gathered people looked at him strangely, cringing a bit. The mage made a what-the-heck gesture, making Joe shrug. "I just didn't want to be the only one feeling uncomfortable." "Goal achieved, you weirdo." Silence. Joe's throat seemed to fill with phlegm, forcing him to cough wetly. He tried to speak, but as expected, he was unable to. He tried to gather the shadows into a spike, but they ignored his will. He tried to use a healing spell, and to everyone's surprise, a ball of water splashed into the mage's shocked face. "How did—" The mage yowled like a wet cat. stopping as he realized that he felt pretty good. Healing spell? Non-arcane? Ah, yes. You did claim to be a cleric, didn't you? Divine magic is unimpeded. I'll have to update the Magical Fair Usage Committee. Joe snorted at that comment, and the mage seemed to remember he existed. Ah, that's right. You two are going for a double signing today, aren't you? This young. Of course, you don't think the Accords are designed for fair usage. Back before the Accords, mages could freely experiment and shape their powers in non-recommended ways. Some mages of the same generation were able to outclass their peers, becoming far more powerful than the others. They could sometimes even specialize into non-mage classes. Imagine a mage turning into an arcane druid. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. Now the Accords ensure that the entire generation moves at the same pace and specializations are chosen for each mage via committee approval. All is fair. Joe wanted to speak up, really wanted to explain how this man must be a weak idiot if he thought this was a good system. Sadly, the spell of silence was still in effect. Equality of outcome was tyrannical, forcing people into specializations for the good of the college, making the strong or gifted wait for what must be decades to better themselves while the others caught up. If he had any doubt that the Archmage was a dictator in his own right, this proved the point perfectly. The mage spoke the entire time they were walking toward the college, waxing eloquent about the college and the good it did for the kingdom, how they would be bettering themselves by signing. Joe rolled his eyes so many times that he was surprised he didn't get dizzy. Several times during the walk, people approached to see what was going on. Each time, the guards around the small group drew weapons, and their path was instantly cleared. They had gone farther east in the city than Joe had ever ventured before, and it seemed they were moving toward a looming tower. The tower was about half the width of the royal palace, perfectly circular and about 50 feet tall. Its color was hard to pinpoint, because it changed every minute or so. The mage escorting them chuckled as he saw the confusion on Joe's face. "You've never seen this? This is quite a fun explanation. It's a game. Each class of magic wants to be the one representing the college. The entire tower will change color to match whatever type of spell is used on it most recently. So, see there, purple. My students must have joined in the fun." Chapter 36. The group walked through the defensive wall which encircled the tower, and the entirety of the building was revealed. Beyond towering above them, the college was incredibly boring. No plants could be seen, no art, and the only form of self-expression seemed to be limited to painting the tower with a spell every once in a while. Since it had first turned purple, the tower had briefly flicked to blue before becoming purple again. Now Joe could see why. A fireball appeared in the hand of a laughing mage in red robes, but before it left his hand, a purple-robed mage pointed at him, and the fireball vanished. The School of Silence dominates this game, their escort smugly told them. Cell knows how it is. Really hard for any other school to impede the others without damage. It is also good for the other mages to learn from a young age that they can't defeat our policing forces. Joe and Cell locked eyes, and Cell seemed to be exasperated. It seemed even this game was rigged. Their escort's voice suddenly rang through the area. "Good morning, students. There will be an assembly today for the promotion of apprentice fire magic, Cell. Today will be his second signing of the Accords, and he will step into his position as a journeyman mage. Be there at noon for the ceremony." Cheers rang through the yard as dozens of people yelled out their support for the captured young man. Tears filled his eyes, mistaken by the others as pride or some other emotion of jubilation. Their escort leaned in, whispering to Joe, "Of course, before the promotion, we will be having a trial. When you are found guilty of conspiring against us, I'll make sure that you specialize into something extra special. Maybe your class ability will be to clean toilets extra easily." Joe and Sel were both shocked at this. Why were they surprised, though? He had just told them that the college chose how their members ranked up. They were led into the tower and walked along oddly stunted and winding corridors. Stepping through a door, Joe saw the most bizarre room he had ever laid eyes on. The room was a spherical shape with the bottom half covered in benches for spectators. The room was far too massive to fit into the building and must have been given extra area with the assistance of spatial magics. Another series of what appeared to be more comfortable seats could be seen on a platform in the middle of the room, one of the chairs larger and grander than the other. It could even be considered a throne. All of these details were secondary to the centerpiece of the room. A gigantic glass tube extended from both the ceiling and floor, shrinking down and becoming narrow, like an hourglass in the center. Where the glass would have met, a book was suspended in midair. Though airborne, it may as well have been concrete on the ground for how much it moved. Colored lights moved through the tubes, condensing into tiny beams of energy that shot into and were apparently absorbed by the book. Mana? How much power was required for the accords that such a grand mana collecting and focusing step was needed? The only reasonable explanation was that the contract used mana constantly to control the people who had signed it. About time. The rogue mage and his captured pet have finally arrived. A terribly obese man stood from the grandiose chair on the platform, raising his jiggling arms to the side so that his multicolored robes flared out and slowly settled around him. I will leave it to the council to decide their fate. He sat back down with a great sigh. After such an ostentatious display to grab their attention, Joe was a bit annoyed that the Archmage hadn't said anything else. Their cases have already been discussed. Another mage, this one's robes a deep blue, stood and spoke. In the case of Apprentice Sel versus the college, he has been found not guilty. He was captured and tortured, according to mana devoted to the Accords. Only recently has he been slipping from his dedicated path. After a period of re-education yet to be determined, and with a second signing of the Accords today, Sel will be moved to the journeyman rankings and gain a specialization befitting his new status. The mage who had escorted them in seemed like he was about to say something. His face turned red, and he appeared furious. The blue-robed counselor ended his speech by glaring at him darkly, and no other words were spoken. The Archmage tapped his chin, pretending to think on the matter. I find this acceptable, though there will need to be punishment. He did slip from his teachings under torture, and it took less than 3 days for him to have a decade of dedication fail him. During his re-education, Sel will spend 8 hours a day devoting his mana to the Accords. This will last no less than 1 full month. If he doesn't die or go insane from the strain, he will be welcomed back as a full member of the college. A few quiet gasps could be heard from the chairs around the Archmage, and their escort seemed greatly pleased, even going so far as to smirk at the mage on the council. Joe looked at Sel, noting how pale he had become. Obviously, this was a terrible punishment. But he had no point of reference for just how bad it would be. When another council mage stood, Joe gulped as his eyes were met. In the case of Joe versus the college, the mage snorted derisively. We find him guilty of attacking the college, torture of a member, and practicing magic without a license. As punishment, we recommend no less than 6 months devoting his mana to the Accords for 12 hours a day. During this time, he will have someone reading him a copy of the Accords. and extolling its virtues for 6 hours a day. We also recommend that at the end of this time frame, as he is a traveler, we send him to respawn until he reaches level 1. At that point, we will bind his mana pool so that he can never again cast arcane magics. Joe would have fallen to his knees if he hadn't been roughly grabbed by a guard standing near him. All of that for holding a mage that was trying to kill him for, what, 2 days? The Archmage nodded along as his sentence was decided. That is lenient, but I expect nothing less from you. If it were possible, I'd say you've gone soft. The Archmage's wheezing laugh echoed around the otherwise silent room. Only now was it apparent how upset the other mages on the platform looked. A few squirmed, but the light around the Accords dimmed a bit, and they became still. You, boy, will serve as an example for the college. It has been quite a few years since someone dared test us. Now we will once again teach the kingdom why it is the last thing they ever want to do. His cruel, piggy eyes were on Joe as he spoke. That said, at the end of this process, you will likely have raised your stolen skill of mana manipulation to great heights. You will make a decent healer at that point, able to continuously heal for days at a time. When you are finished with your punishment, you will go serve the kingdom as a healer until you have earned enough to repay us for those skills. We'll say 10,000 gold total. It should only take you a decade or so. How does that sound? You have been offered a quest, punishment for your crimes. Serve your sentence with the Mages College by spending 12 hours a day for 6 months, refilling the mana of the Accords, and pay 10,000 gold to the college. This quest is mandatory if you have signed the Accords, as it has been offered but by the Archmage. Rewards: you will not be hunted by the college. Failure: you will be hunted by the college. Accept? Yes or no? Not a chance. Joe declined the quest so quickly that he was able to see the tiny smirk that fluttered across the Archmage's face. Oh, not accepting willingly. I thought that you had learned your lesson. Don't worry, we will adjust the quest accordingly once you have signed the Accords. Joe wanted to spit when he heard that terrible attempt at a pun. You can't just say the same thing twice and call it a joke. Well, we have a few hours until noon. Why don't we get started charging the Accords while we wait? Sel, this will count towards your punishment. Joe, not so much. The piggy eyes were mirthful, as the captured men were, frog-marched to the glass tubing on the dais. Their wrists were gripped, and their hands shoved against the glowing surface. A seizure rocked them, and their muscles locked, as if they had grabbed an electric wire. Mana instantly began to be torn out of their quaking bodies. The power draw wasn't at all like using a ritual. For some reason, it felt like this process was designed to be painful. Joe bent his mind to manipulating the mana and keeping it contained within his channels. Though an imperfect solution, the pain dropped to a dull roar. His channels had been shaped to handle large quantities of mana moving through him at once, and he was using this fact to lessen the pain inflicted on him. Sel was having far more issues, and he cried out every few seconds as his mana ran out and tried to regenerate. Joe lasted twice as long as Sel, but his mana also ran dry. He still couldn't pull his hands away from the tube, but each time mana appeared in his body, the painful shock came again. This was an extraordinarily efficient form of torture, as it didn't directly harm the body, but Joe was determined not to be a victim. He turned his mind inward, and with each suctioning current, he did his best to use his mana channels as if this act was second nature. An hour passed, and yet there was no end in sight. They had been escorted here at the crack of dawn, and were not going to be signing the Accords until noon. Another hour of time slowly trickled by, and still Joe refused to break. Shock after shock rocked his system. But at least now that his channels were custom-made for the Force, there was no pain from the mana being pulled from his body. Joe mentally checked the notifications waiting for him and smiled as the updates took effect. You have put your mind and body through a grueling training regimen. This has tested you in ways you have never been tested before, and the results are beginning to show. You can add 1 point to either Constitution or Wisdom. Please choose. Constitution, Wisdom. Joe added a point to his Constitution, almost managing to grin as he saw a few people become horrified as his body began to pull mana from the air around him in order to grow. What is happening? What did he just do? A panicked voice reached his ears. How is he drawing in mana while touching the tubing? Kill him! Wait, a voice called sharply. Joe grimaced as the shock came again. He had been hoping they would send him to respawn so he could rally his guild to destroy this place. It looks like he spent a characteristic point to get above a 10-point threshold. No need for alarm. He was just trying to withstand the pain of the Accords. A useless gesture. Joe ignored the seemingly satisfied Archmage as he kept going over the notifications. Skill increased. Mana manipulation. Beginner 9. What are you doing to yourself? Total body torture to gain a few measly skill points? Now that is dedication. Skill increased. Channeling. Beginner 2. Congratulations. You have reached the beginner stages of channeling and have gained an extra effect based on your actions with channeling to this point. Extra effect, plus 5% spell stability when channeling mana. Not terrible gains for 2 hours of grueling pain. Joe would have preferred not to have been in this position, but was seriously considering doing this for a while just to get his mana manipulation to greater heights. He could always log out and let his avatar take the beating for him, but he wouldn't gain any skill levels that way. That was the big danger of being locked up for 6 months of real time. Joe wouldn't get any skills nor any play time. He also couldn't delete his character and start a new one, since that would erase his mind entirely. An indefinite amount of time later, Joe heard the words that he had been yearning for since the start of this process. That's enough for now. The students will be joining us soon, and we should prepare for the ceremony. Someone came over to the captives, grabbed their wrists, and yanked their hands off the tubes. Joe noticed that whoever it was kept their own hands covered with gloves, just in case they bumped against the glass. Hardly able to remain on their feet, Joe and Zell were brushed off by one of their escorts, obviously an attempt to mask the torture they had just gone through. Their clothes were covered with opulent robes, and someone roughly scrubbed their faces with a damp rag. Apparently looking as good as they were going to, they were marched in front of the Archmage's throne and forced to kneel. Zell was moving easily and with relief, but Joe's muscles were locked and tense. He was not looking forward to this. Students began pouring into the seating area, chatting amicably and separating themselves by the color of their robes. The noise steadily grew, but it seemed there were only about 300 total mages joining to watch what they thought of as a joyous spectacle. When everyone had found a seat, they waited to actually sit down until the Archmage motioned for them to do so. Joe's eyes widened. Never had he imagined that the Archmage had such control over the magically inclined. Stealing a glance around, he saw that the counselors' eyes were all deadened, and they were watching the proceedings helplessly. Today, the Archmage struggled to his feet, hiding his lack of physical fitness by flourishing his robes. We have gathered to observe a special event. Many of you know your young brother, apprentice, Fire Mage Zell. The gathering crowd began cheering. calming down after a long moment as the Archmage waved his hands. What many of you do not know is that a few days ago he was captured by a rogue mage. The gasping drowned out the applause instantly. While this young man was captured, he remained strong. He fought valiantly against his captor and learned many very important lessons. His eyes glinted with mirth as the assembled people cheered. They couldn't know that the lessons he had learned is one that they would all eventually learn as well. For his strength and mental fortitude, today he will be promoted to the rank of Journeyman Mage, and the council will decide upon his first specialization. The silence lasted a second longer, but then the people seemed to explode into wild cheering and clapping. A tear trickled from Zell's eye, but any who saw the shining liquid only thought that he had been overcome with joy and was attempting to remain stoic. They respected him all the more for it. "Apprentice Zell, you may approach and sign the accords." Joe had to hand it to the guy. He knew how to work an audience. Zell got to his feet and marched toward the accords robotically. He was obviously under compulsion, but that wasn't noticeable from a distance. Joe had to wonder why the Archmage didn't simply order everyone to sign it 3 times. Did it require more mana to control the populace if they actively fought against it? That would make sense. Also, it was already using a huge amount of mana. Did the amount of times you sign it correlate to how much mana it allocated to control you? He had seen the entire construct dim when the gathered counselors had shifted around. Joe watched as Zell walked the last few feet and reached toward the utterly massive book that contained the accords. The book opened, and pages flew by. It stopped, once again becoming as still as a predator awaiting prey. Zell's hand kept moving, and a beautiful quill that seemed to be made out of pure mana appeared in his hand. The last inch of his scrawled name was traversed, and Zell's name appeared in the accords for the second time. The mana rushing through the glass seemed to become more agitated, and a small arc of power leapt from the accords into Zell. He reacted as if he had been struck by lightning, his entire body stiffening as he gasped in pain. When he could move again, he turned around with a wide smile plastered across his face. "Rejoin us, Journeyman Zell," the Archmage roared, the awestruck people taking his cue to begin celebrating for their newly promoted member. Zell bounded down the stairs, standing proudly in the spot he had vacated just moments before. Joe looked at him and was able to see that his wide eyes were horrified, not matching the rest of his expression at all. Joe nodded at his ex-captive as the Archmage began to speak once again. "The other man up here is one that none of you recognize, for good reason. This man is the rogue mage who held Zell captive. Your reputation with the Mages College has suffered. Reputation has been reduced by 2,000. New status with the college. Hostile." "That's right," the Archmage bellowed as the room broke into confused whispers. "This man broke our rules and needs to pay for his crimes. We have decided to be merciful, though." Booing followed his words. I know. As much as we may want to execute him for his crimes, he is a traveler. A single death would be too simple for him. Not only that, but when he was discovered, he surrendered as soon as he was able. Of course, this was the only possible outcome. After all, our own Master of the Flame was sent to bring him in. The red-robed mage on the dais with them stood and bowed. The Archmage nodded approvingly. This man, known only as Joe, has sworn to follow our rules from this point forward. To that end, he will be signing the accords today. He will never again get the chance to hurt one of my precious students. Mana must have been used to empower his words and the audience, because the clapping and cheering could be considered sonic damage at this point. Joe, unlike Zell, was not allowed to freely walk to the Accords. He and two others climbed the stairs, but they stopped a few stairs from the top. "Now is the moment of truth," the Archmage proclaimed as he watched Joe carefully. Will this man prove himself a warlock, or will he join the college as the lowest of the low, hoping against hope that he will one day deserve to join us properly? Chapter 37. Taking a deep breath, Joe slowly walked the last few steps to the Accords. He reached a trembling hand toward the book, which burned black with falsifications in his occultist's sight. The book began to shine with power and fell open. The pages blurred by, coming to rest at the next available open space. Joe's hand came closer, and a quill formed in his grasp. Before he touched the page, he opened his left hand and allowed his scepter to drop from his storage ring into his waiting palm. "Joe, what are you doing?" the Archmage boomed. "The Accords are protected by the entire college. Attacking them with a legendary weapon would do nothing. What are you going to do to them with a glorified stick? Remove his silence. Answer, boy." Joe looked back as the spell of silence deactivated. "Obviously, I'm going to do nothing to the Accords with my scepter." He looked back to the Accords and allowed the quill to drift closer. Seeing this, the prepared spells targeted him were cancelled, and the tension eased. Joe paused just before the quill touched the ancient paper, touching the book with his finger directly. "I really hope this counts. Activate ability from title terms and conditions." His voice was harsh from the long hours of not speaking, but it was more than enough to activate the first title he had ever gained. Terms and conditions, single-use special effect activated. There will be no contract-based repercussions to destroying the targeted contract, though other parties may not be pleased with you. Usability on contract. The Accords. Yes, no. What did he just say? The Archmage struggled to his feet and was about to start climbing the stairs. "Silence him now." "Yes!" Joe shouted as he drove the tag-lock needle on his scepter into his leg. A red one floated up from him as a slew of messages began to appear. "You have activated the special effect from the title terms and conditions. The minor contract, the Accords, will be destroyed in 5, 4. You have activated a new ritual, Stasis. This ritual makes the target unable to interact with anything, move, or perform any action. The target is still able to see and think. While this ritual is active, the target and anything they have equipped cannot be damaged, moved, or altered in any way. This ritual lasts for 5 minutes. Time remaining, 4 minutes, 58 seconds. Title gained, Warlock 1. You have broken your promise to the Master of Fire of the Mages College. You had promised not to cause trouble. Talk to the wronged party, a magistrate, or the king to get this title removed. Subsequent increases in this title's ranking will have increasingly negative effects on you. Effect: Charisma -1 plus 10% cost for all purchases at neutral or good-aligned shops. Skill increased: Ritual Magic Apprentice. V. Testing new things on yourself is a surefire way to end up dead. Good thing you like risks. Let's see if this one pays off. The Archmage stopped, looking at Joe's unmoving form in confusion. You attacked yourself? Why? What are you doing? He pointed at Joe, creating a lightning bolt that slammed into the utterly still man. A perfect hit, and yet not a single aspect of Joe had changed. Even his clothes were undamaged. The bolt of power had just ended. As everyone looked on in wonder with just a hint of confusion, Joe's titular effect came into play. The light around the accords brightened as mana accumulated, and the sound of tearing paper shook the room. Without any further fancy effects, the accords vanished with a small pop. The Archmage stumbled, staring in horror at the space the massive book used to occupy. What have you done? The cursed accords are gone. The Master of Fire spoke in a shocked tone. He seemed even more surprised that he had been able to speak. We are free. Counselors, we are free. Kill that swine. The incredulous tone had turned murderous at the end. Gone? How? Are you all not dead then? The Archmage squealed as he noted dozens of hostile gazes centered on him. He erected a shield around himself just before multiple elemental spells slammed into the thin barrier of energy. Students, help! They're attacking me! Confusion among the students was the only reaction to his words. They all knew it was impossible to intentionally hurt one of the members of the college, especially the Archmage. So what was going on? In their confusion, no one moved to help either side. The Archmage was weathering the Council's attacks only due to the huge amount of power-enhancing and defensive enhancements that covered his corpulent body. Lightning struck, and strange shimmers in the air pulsed with dark intent. Fire devoured the air around the Archmage, leaving him gasping even though he was protected from direct damage. Slabs of tile lifted from the ground, superheating and flying at such speeds that they could be called a meteorite. One by one, the charms and mana-infused artifacts held by the Archmage began to break. His counterattacks were so weak that they couldn't even pierce the wall of power that the attacks against him created around his body. Instead, he began looking for a way to flee the battle. His protections would not last forever. In fact, they were already faltering, but it gave him time to retreat up the stairs to where Joe was frozen in place. Breathing heavily from climbing the stairs and fighting, the Archmage pulled an ornate dagger out of a satchel on his side and stabbed it at Joe's heart. The tip of the dagger stopped at the first clothing fiber it encountered, as if the Archmage had struck a wall of steel. Seeing that there was no effect, the Archmage instead ducked behind Joe and tried to use him as a shield. His plan was lacking, as it appeared the other mages had no qualms about blasting both of them into oblivion. In fact, it seemed that though the spells were becoming less flashy, they were becoming far more deadly. A line of what could only be described as instant death drilled into his shield, only stopped due to the sheer complexity of enchantments the Archmage had been forcing others to create for him for centuries. "You bastard! What did you do to my accords?" The Archmage stood screaming and sobbing at Joe, as the air sizzled with redirected and deflected spells. "I will find some way to destroy you for this." A wave of magma settled on him and shattered the last of his passive defenses. The Archmage screamed as droplets of molten stone splattered across his face. Wait, please stop. I surrender. He managed to save himself by raising a weak shield with his own power, obviously unused to the requirements of using his own magic for any length of time. This was a man who controlled others, and he had allowed his personal power to wane in favor of a few decades of hedonism. The attacks against him paused momentarily, but the looks on the counselors' faces promised violence would resume soon. "I've closed the spatial rifts in this area. There will be no escape via teleportation." A mage in shimmering black robes spoke softly, but was heard clearly across the vast room. His words made the Archmage's face pale even more. "Why? Why should we allow you to live when we have been your slaves for years, you pathetic worm? Did you ever afford us the opportunity to escape or allow us to plead our case? You all had it coming." The trembling Archmage screeched and stomped on the floor, trying and failing to slit Joe's throat. This prompted no reaction from the mages, which bothered Joe quite a bit. You belittled my craft, laughed at those of us who created binding contracts. I was getting my revenge for being treated as a drudge, a useless mongrel. You called me quill pusher, or the poor man's lawyer. So you enslaved us, all of us. I had never met you. A woman in brown robes yelled up at him. It didn't matter. None of you matter. I'm the Archmage. I knew that contract magic was more powerful than any of you could hope to defeat, and I proved it. The obese man was breathing heavily and sinking to the floor, clutching at his chest as though his heart was giving out. The kingdom has been at war. You held us back, refusing to allow us to join in. Thousands have died because of your cowardice and profit-mongering. Our outlying villages have been stolen or destroyed. Anyone not in the capital city either dead or enslaved. You may have killed humanity as a whole through your inaction. I don't care. Bam. It turned out that the Archmage wasn't having a heart attack. He was pulling a stone that blazed with multicolored light out of a hidden pocket. You were all going to die anyway. The Archmage reared back to throw the stone, but Joe's hand reached out and snagged his flabby arm. Joe snatched away the stone, then swung his scepter into the Archmage's head. The heavy man stumbled back, uncomprehending, as Joe jumped forward, slamming into him and sending him flying into the space that had been recently vacated by the Accords. Screaming, the Archmage was pumped full of the mana that had been accumulated and stored by the tubing. Mana rolled into his body, filling it beyond capacity, beyond comprehension or human limits. Joe landed on the floor and covered his head. The screams seemed to linger and reverberate in the air as the Archmage's body inflated and exploded into gore. Mana-charged flesh vaporized before it had a chance to land on anything. But the concussive wave blasted Joe off the raised platform. He landed heavily with a large portion of his health removed, stunned and disoriented. He looked up to see potentially hostile council members staring down at him. But then Zell pushed through the wall of bodies that had formed around him. Joe, you're alive? How? How did you survive all of that and still manage to stop him from attacking us? Shaking his head, Joe coughed and healed himself. Ow, dang, that hurt. Remember that ritual we made this morning? It's a ritual named Stasis. Activating it made me unable to move or perform any action, but it also shielded me from everything thrown at me. How did you get out? When you wanted to move, it just stopped. Zell seemed to take his answer at face value, which Joe appreciated. I built a function into all my rituals that lets me deactivate them at will. I knew it might kill me to block that attack, but I had to stop him. I can always come back. You all wouldn't be able to. Joe took Zell's hand, getting pulled to his feet by what he now hoped was a friend. Hand me the stone, boy. A man in white robes with black arcane characters stitched into it held out his hand. Joe looked over at Zell. Zell nodded in approval. He's the master of enchantment. Do it. Joe shrugged and placed the bright stone into the outstretched hand. Peering into the stone, the man began to shiver. So unstable. How did it even last this long? What a maniac. A grand radiant core with an enchantment created to dissociate itself on impact. That reaction would have obliterated at least half the city. A couple students listening in fainted. Zell was pale and licked his lips with nervousness. What? What do we do with it? I'm feeding it to the mana engine is what I'm doing with it. Don't get involved in conversations at this level, you milk drinker. The wizened old man walked over to the exposed glass of what was apparently something called a mana engine and touched the stone to the tubing. The stone stuck there, the light inside it slowly fading. There. Give it a few minutes and all the stored power will be converted into a usable form. Might even fix the protections. Ha! With that much power, it better fix the protections." "What do you mean?" a slightly less wrinkled mage asked him. The white-robed man folded his arms behind his back. "That fool of an archmage diverted the power of the mana engine into keeping his precious accords in effect. He left the college defenseless, unprotected from the outside world. That's the real reason he never let anyone but apprentices take missions for the army or kingdom. He needed us here to protect him if we were attacked." He spat to the side. "I think revenge is completely underrated. Seeing him get vaporized felt amazing." Joe looked at the remaining mages surrounding him. "I guess the next question is, now what?" "Now what, indeed. You have saved us from a fate that none of us wanted, freeing hundreds of nobles, mages, and travelers, even if they didn't know they were slaves. Anything you want of us, we will try to accommodate. At least, I will." The Master of Fire spoke for the group, and those around him nodded. They seemed a bit wary of making a sweeping promise like that, but seemed to feel a bit guilty about their doubt. After all, they were free now. They could tell him no if he tried for outlandish rewards. In that case, Joe thought for a moment, and the mages around him became rather tense as the silence persisted. "I could ask for money or enchantments, but the truth is, I either don't need them or don't know what to ask for. Instead, I'll only ask for a few general terms. 1. I'd like training as a mage, but I don't want to be beholden to your group. Stop this rogue mage garbage and let people explore their powers. Next, I'd like to ask that you reduce your fees and open the college to the general public. That is for this next request. As you know, the kingdom is at war. I'd like you to assist them however possible. More mages are needed if we are going to expand the human influence, and what we currently have simply isn't enough to combat the Wolfman Nation." The mages grandly nodded. These were things they would have gotten around to, but as a personal request from their savior, they would be able to move much faster and avoid some political bargaining on these issues. Also, I know that the library is desperate to expand their selection. Would you be opposed to donating a copy of your research to them for safekeeping? I am certain they would be willing to place restrictions on who can access the materials. This suggestion was met with a good deal less enthusiasm, but they didn't let know. Finally, Joe's tone made the tension reappear. "Master of Fire, yes? I broke a promise with you. In light of the circumstances, could you please remove my warlock status? Your reputation with the Mages College has increased by 8,000 points. Current standing, extended family." Epilogue. When Joe first entered the common area of the guild house, a squealing form with vivid blue hair slammed into him in a full-body tackle. You destroyed the accords. Anyone who had signed them got a notification. I hadn't even known how restricted that made us. How did you figure it out? Did you know that there are now 12 new classes we can specialize as? 12? And that's only what we know about. I'm going to learn to enchant. I got accepted right away when I told them I knew you and was part of your guild. All of us even get a discount. Tara. Joe's mind finally caught up to the flood of words that was entering his ears. Her mouth was like a reverse black hole. Instead of absorbing things, she constantly spewed noise. Wait, everyone knows it was me? There was a server-wide announcement. Have you not looked at your notifications? Tara grinned at him, but it turned into a pout after a moment. You didn't yet, did you? Gah, you are famous. You must have gained like a bazillion fame points from this. Look at your notifications. Do it now. Tara's excited chatter had drawn most of the room's inhabitants to them, and they seemed to agree with her. Aten walked into the area, and upon seeing Joe, looked like he was about to kiss him. Joe, I can't believe it. We are now the top guild, and quiet down, Tara coolly interrupted him. Joe hasn't looked over his notifications. Don't spoil the surprise. Now, with a pained look on his face, Aten sat down, muttering darkly. I'm going to get voted out at this rate. Maybe he'll let me be an officer at least. With all the expectant eyes on him, Joe awkwardly opened his overburdened notification screen. Server-wide announcement. Rejoice. The Mages College has been freed from the tyrannical slavery of the Archmage by player Joe of the Guild, the Wanderers. With the defeat of the Archmage, new goods, such as mana potions, are available for sale at various shops. The cost of being trained in mage-based skills has been reduced by 60%, and 12 new mage-based classes are available for specialization at the Mages College. The Guild, the Wanderers, has maxed out their reputation with the Kingdom of Ardania for as long as Joe remains a member. Their guild tax to the kingdom has been reduced by 75%. Be warned, oppose them, and you oppose the crown. Hidden quest, legendary, completed, unshackling magic. You completed a quest that no one knew was a quest by destroying a contract that could not be destroyed. Not only did you defeat the Archmage, but you did not allow any other mages to perish. By completing seemingly impossible requirements and saving those that should not have survived, the rating of this quest increased from epic to legendary difficulty. Rewards have increased, but you will not be able to loot the Mages College without breaking the law. Rewards: experience 20,100 platinum coins. Prices for skills and class training at the college are further reduced for you and players on your friend list by 30%. Reputation with the college is locked at maximum unless you commit a high crime against them. As you completed this quest alone, and the college is joining the war, you will gain 5% of all contribution points earned by the college for the war effort. This will impact your quest, Shatterer people. The ranking of your deity has increased. He has moved from unknown to pretty much unknown. Rare knowledge items and locations will be 5% easier for all players to discover for 2 weeks. Quest complete. Earn a god's favor. You have found enough hidden knowledge or completed enough hidden quests to earn the favor of a deity. Reward: you have unlocked your first specialization. Reach level 10 and go to a shrine dedicated to Tatum in order to see details. Reputation increase with Hidden God. Tatum, 2000. Current status: friendly. Title gained: the Chosen of Tatum. You are the chosen of a deity and have his blessing. When your class would show as Cleric, it will now show as Arch-Cleric. You have gained access to a new spell. Spell gained: Resurrection, Novice Y. This is a spell granted only to the champion of a deity, and only one follower may have this spell at a time. Increase your skill with this spell to increase its effects. Effect: restore a fallen person to life with 24 plus 1n% health, mana, and stamina, and return 19 plus 1n% of lost experience, where n equals skill level. Can be used once every 24 hours. Target must be the same level or lower than the caster. Target must be resurrected within 1 hour of death. Cannot be used on self. Title gained: Anti-Mage. You have killed the highest-ranked mage in the kingdom. By doing so, you have proven that you have what it takes to kill any of them. Plus 10% spell resist, plus 50% intimidation bonus against mage-based classes. Title gained: Immovable Object. You have withstood spells that could shatter buildings and weapons that can pierce steel. You did so stoically without flinching, dodging, or dying. Plus 80% knockback resistance, Constitution, plus 2, Strength, plus 1. Title removed. You have lost the title terms and conditions due to using the benefit of the title. Title removed. Warlock. You have lost the title Warlock. Charisma and shop prices have been reset. Caution. You have at least 5 of 10 title slots filled. You can choose to replace one if needed, but be warned, gaining a mandatory negative title while all the title slots are full will delete one other non-mandatory title at random. Example, Warlock. Joe gasped as all of the effects slammed into him at the same time. Not only did he move to level 9 instantly, but he passed the 10-point threshold in strength as well. His bones shifted painfully as his muscles thickened and became more supportive. Standing suddenly didn't feel like a chore, and he felt like he could carry an entire backpack filled with wolf meat. He took a deep breath, his chest pulling air into his lungs without the strain that used to cause him to cough. Joe felt human again. After getting to this new level, Joe had also gained 5 characteristic points to spend, so he quickly placed 3 into intelligence and 2 into wisdom. Closing all the screens, he looked around at the group that was waiting for him with strange smiles. Thinking of the notifications they would have seen, he whooped for joy. This is amazing. Max reputation with Ardania and 75% less tax? This caused a few people to cheer, especially A10, who was clapping and whistling into an otherwise mostly quiet room. Tara snickered and looked at Joe out of the corner of her eye. No, yeah, we're excited. Gotta say, whatever you just did that made all your skin slide around was a little freaky. Looked like you had worms crawling through you. Oh no, gross. Now I need a shower. Joe shook a bit theatrically. I just got to 10 strength and broke through a threshold. A few people sighed and seemed less disgusted. A10 noticed that people were starting to disperse now that the fun was over and quickly whistled to get their attention. With the prices and new classes available at the college, we will be sponsoring anyone who wants to get a class change. Right now, we only have 2 magic users, and we need to beef those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers. Right now, anyone who changes class is guaranteed a spot in one of the top 20 squads. I know most of you aren't spec'd for it, having put points into mostly physical stats. So don't worry about us holding it against you if you want to keep your current class. Only a small amount of people were interested in the class change, and most of them were very low level. A10 had them moved to another room, leaving Joe to catch his breath and relax a bit. He wanted to nap, but he needed to take a moment and rethink his plans at this point. Now that new mage skills were available to him, he needed to get some training and become more powerful. Not to mention, now that he had Max standing with the college, it was likely that he could find books and manuals on ritual magic that had been banned by the recently deceased Archmage. Speaking of ritual magic, Joe checked his stat sheet and noticed that he had 16 unused skill points. For a long moment, he thought about putting them into his resurrection spell. But it was not really worth it, as he could only use that spell once a day. He decided to rank it up by using it for a while so he could grasp the concepts behind it. Joe placed 14 points into ritual magic, saving 2 points just in case he needed them later. After accepting the changes, his mind was flooded with new concepts and nuanced meanings of all the diagrams and spell components he had studied thus far. It felt like he had just graduated high school with an education devoted to rituals. He read the notification that appeared, followed by looking over his stat sheet and top 5 skills. Skill increased. Ritual magic. Student 9. Rejoice. You have entered the ranks of a student in ritual magic. Based on your recent combat-aligned ritual usage, a new effect will be added to the skill. Effect: rituals are 10% more effective against single targets. This increases to 15% if another being was forced to participate in the ritual's creation against their will, and to 20% if the target of the ritual was forced to participate in the creation of the ritual. Forcing does not include using their genetic material to target them. Name: Joe, the Chosen of Tatum. Class: Archcleric, Actual Ritualist. Profession: Scholar, Actual Occultist. Level 9. Experience: 37,978. Experience to next level: 7,022. Hit points: 50 out of 50. Modifier: 50 plus 0. Mana 704 out of 704. Modifier: 12.5 per point of intelligence, plus 100% from deity, minus 12% from mana manipulation. Mana regen: 8.99 per second. Modifier: 25 per point of wisdom, plus 9% from coalescence. Stamina: 50 out of 50. Modifier: 50 plus 0 plus 0. Characteristic raw score. Modifier: Strength: 10. Modifier: 1.10. Dexterity: 12. Modifier: 1.12. Constitution: 10. Modifier: 1.10. Intelligence: 33. Modifier: 1.33. Wisdom: 32. Modifier: 1.32. Charisma: 15. Modifier: 1.15. Perception: 25. Modifier: 125. Luck: 15. Modifier: 115. Karmic luck: plus 5. Top skills: Jump, Master 0. Your ability to jump skillfully and without hurting yourself. Jump around, Master 0. Add your jump skill level to anything that can be jumped. Be careful not to jump to incorrect conclusions. Current: plus 62. Ritual magic: Student 9. Ability to create, maintain, and change rituals much more efficiently than usual, minus 0. 5% mana and component cost, where N equals skill level. Rituals are 10% more effective against single targets. This increases to 15% if another being was forced to participate in the ritual's creation against their will, and to 20% if the target of the ritual was forced to participate in the ritual. Forcing does not include using their genetic material to target them. Mana manipulation: Beginner: 9. Minus 30, plus 1% mana, plus 1% spell efficiency, where N equals skill level. Maximum: 25% efficiency. Mend: Beginner. 8. Select a target to heal, restoring 5N health, where N equals skill level. Mend is able to heal broken bones. Dark Affinity is automatically added to the spell and will heal dark-aligned creatures twice as effectively. Looking over the stats and skills, Joe rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He had a solid set of skills and a supportive guild. And now it was time to start putting together his own team. Though he was enjoying his time as a solo player, if he wanted to progress through the game, he needed to become more active with other players. When Joe had trained and learned to trust his team, he would start teaching them ritual magic and work toward building his coven. Eventually, they would be able to shape the world with sage-tier rituals. Joe felt a piercing gaze as he finished reading. Looking over his shoulder, he saw Tatum sitting at the table behind him, apparently unseen by the other occupants of the room. The deity winked and nodded, as if to affirm that Joe's plans were well thought out. After pointing at their guild banner, Tatum vanished, leaving behind only the smell of old books. Joe looked at the banner, noting that there was now a holographic royal seal seemingly floating over their coat of arms. He would need to point that out to someone. He sighed and stood up. It was time to get to work. His goals might still be a long way off, but he was happy with his progress to this point. Besides, Joe knew that he would never stop until he had completed everything the game offered.